culture for Africa. Partner with Channel Africa because Africa's voice is the future. Africa is a story, a living, breathing, ever-evolving masterpiece. And for over 5 decades now, one voice has told it like no other. Channel Africa. More than just a broadcaster, Channel Africa is the pulse of the continent, African-led, African-run, and deeply rooted in its heritage. It's the only international station that speaks to Africa in its own voices.
It's a Thursday morning. A very good morning to you. If you are just waking up with us, it's time to rise and shine right here on Channel Africa, where we bring you the African perspective. Top of the morning to you, wherever you may be across this beautiful continent of ours. My name is Peter Ndoro, and we're broadcasting live from our studios in Johannesburg, South Africa. Good morning, Asanda, Beda.
Good morning, Peter Ndoro. My name is exactly that, what he just introduced me as. No additional names, no middle names. Thank you so much for joining us, and a very good morning, everybody, on this Thursday. It is the 8th today, the 8th of May.
My goodness, this year's flying by, hey?
I'm telling you. And let's say thanks to Jabunko Lele as well for driving us up until this point with that amazing music. It does wake you up in the morning. Gives you that oomph that you need.
I like his inspirational sounds as well, those voices. So, we've got a packed show, haven't we? What's coming up?
We're going to be talking about the election of the new Pope, since Pope Francis has passed and left us. We'll be talking about that later on, though, after even the economics news. But then, of course, we always start with our Africa Roundup, giving you some of the headlines you might have missed in terms of what's making news on our continent and around us. And then, of course, we have a Central Africa wrap that is going to be what we focus on today. As you know, every day we focus on a region in Africa with all the stories that need to be known.
Yeah, and in the news this hour, Somalia has launched voter registration for the forthcoming local government elections, and Tanzania making moves to increase its role in the global minerals market. More on these stories and others after the news, as we say good morning to Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News. The African perspective.
Good morning, Peter. Very good morning to our listeners. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the closing ceremony of the 15th Commonwealth Regional Conference for Heads of Anti-Corruption Agencies in Africa this morning. The 5-day conference is taking place in Cape Town. Retired Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and Justice, Constitutional and Development Minister Mamuluko Kubai were amongst the speakers at the conference this week. Both reflected on the necessity of the Commission of Inquiry into state capture headed by Zondo from 2018 to 2022 and the ongoing fight against corruption in the country. South Africa's Border Management Authority Commissioner Michael Masiapato has issued a stern warning to criminal syndicates. Officers have intercepted various attempts to smuggle high-value assets suspected to be linked to the transitional crime syndicates attempting to smuggle them into neighboring countries. Masiapato has commended the officers. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Memi Mokotsi explains.
The Border Management Authority has sent a stern warning to criminal syndicates and reported that on the 5th of May, BMA border guards at Kosi Bay intercepted and recovered 3 high-value assets suspected to be linked to transnational crime syndicates attempting to smuggle them into neighboring countries. While conducting such operations at the customs inspection on that Monday morning, the BMA border guards uncovered a black Senk motorbike frame concealed inside a trailer. The frame matched details from a pending police case of a stolen motorbike in Mayville.
British authorities have reportedly denied South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party leader, Julius Malema, a visa to the UK for the Cambridge conference taking place this week. And In a post on social media platform X, Malema claims that authorities provided no substantial justification for denying him the visa. He went further to say it is clear that this is an attempt to silence a dissenting political perspective. He was at the OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg when he received the news. Malema says they were promised that everything would be sorted, but instead he received a regret letter just 4 hours before his departure. The U.S. government is offering illegal migrants a sum of $1,000 in paid travel to leave the U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced that self-deportation is the best way to leave the United States to avoid arrest. President Donald Trump also told reporters that those who take up the offer could one day be offered a legal pathway to return to the U.S. Since returning to office in January, Trump has launched a major crackdown on illegal immigration, at times relying on controversial tactics such as the invocation of centuries-old wartime law. Border Patrol data showed a record low of just over 7,000 arrests at the U.S.-Mexico border during the month of March. On the other hand, courts have blocked Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship for certain children. And lastly, Conservative leader Friedrich Merz has won a parliament vote to become Germany's next chancellor at the second attempt. Merz had initially fallen 6 votes short of the absolute majority he needed yesterday, a significant blow to his prestige and unprecedented failure in post-war German history. Channel Africa News, I am Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Arsenal's Champions League run ends following a 3-1 aggregate loss to Paris Saint-Germain last night. And India captain Rohit Sharma retires from Test cricket. Details of these and other stories coming up at the bottom of the hour.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Well, let's take a moment to thank the team on technical production here on Africa Rise and Shine is Katu Madaba. On social media is Talent Butelezi. On production is Tlengiwe Mabaso, Joey Likhodi and Pumuzo Ramakadza. On news is Onele Nzinzi. Sports is Musibudi Makura. And then economics news is Chanduko Ligege. Let's get into our Africa Roundup now. This is where we take a look at some of the stories you may have missed maybe yesterday or even the day before, in terms of what you need to know on what's happening on our continent and around us. And then also it kind of gives us a link into what we can expect in terms of updates going into this new day. So we go to Somalia first, and they've launched a voter registration for the forthcoming local government elections. 70-year-old Rooney Mohammed is one of many Somalis who are registering to vote. A break from the long-standing practice of leaders being chosen by clan elders.
My last time to vote was during the first president of Somalia, Aden Adde. For me, it is happiness and dance, and I will be happier if I get to participate this time round. It is happiness for me to be a registered voter in our country. We are now ready.
Elder Mohammed Hassan Had says the shift is a welcome change. He describes how lawmakers were previously chosen through a combination of conference politics and clan elder selections, with wealthy or well-connected candidates often securing positions. He says it is a dignity for the country when the public can vote for the candidate they like and reject the one they don't.
Sudan's army has said that its anti-aircraft systems intercepted drones targeting the country's largest naval base in the wartime capital, Port Sudan, on Wednesday. David Doyle has more.
Standing in front of a towering column of smoke in Port Sudan, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has vowed retribution. Drone strikes have pounded Sudan's wartime capital for days, opening a new front in the conflict between Burhan's armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Port Sudan had enjoyed relative calm since the civil war erupted more than 2 years ago. It has become a hub for diplomats, UN officials and agencies and is Sudan's key gateway for humanitarian aid. It's also a base for the army-aligned government after the RSF seized much of the capital Khartoum early in the conflict, as well as a refuge for hundreds of thousands of displaced people.
Tanzania says it is making moves to increase its role in the global market for critical minerals, with government officials and industry players highlighting new opportunities for exports. The country is aiming to leverage the growing global demand for minerals like graphite, nickel and lithium. Daniel Kijo has more.
At a mining forum held in Dar es Salaam, the Minister of Minerals, Anthony Mavunde, stated that Tanzania has considerable deposits of key minerals such as graphite, lithium and rare earth elements. He added that several projects are already underway, including the graphite development in Mahenga and nickel exploration in Kabanga. Ministry officials outlined new steps that the government is taking to support the sector. These include revisiting legal frameworks, fast-tracking mining licenses and encouraging investment in value-added processing. Officials noted that local processing of minerals is being prioritized to increase economic returns and employment. Tanzania's strategy aligns with broader global trends where supply chains in critical minerals are becoming increasingly important for energy transition and technological industries.
A Kenyan court on Wednesday fined 4 men for attempting to traffic thousands of ants out of the country. This is in a case that wildlife experts says signals a shift in biopiracy from iconic animals like elephants to lesser-known species. David Doyle has the story.
2 Belgian teenagers, a Vietnamese man and a Kenyan national were arrested on April 5th, accused of trying to smuggle roughly 5,440 giant African harvester ant queens in modified test tubes and syringes. Kenyan prosecutors valued the ants at around 1.2 million Kenyan shillings, or $9,300 US. Retail prices in the UK, however, suggest the haul could have fetched as much as $1 million if it had reached European shores. There, ant enthusiasts maintain colonies in large transparent vessels known as formicariums to observe their cooperative behaviour. All 4 traffickers pleaded guilty. They were each ordered to pay a $7,700 fine or face 12 months in jail.
That's how we wrap our Africa Roundup on this Thursday. Do stay tuned to Africa Rise and Shine. My partner, Peter Ndoro, will be giving you a look at some of the stories making headlines in the region of Central Africa.
Yes, indeed.
The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
Just the other day, I went to pick up my daughter from school, and as per usual, her friends don't usually come to my car just to say hellos and goodbyes. So this particular day, they made this comment about my jacket, saying that it's giving baddie vibes. You say my jacket is giving what?
It's giving
baddie vibes. It got me thinking, where did the baddies come from? Because nothing is new under the sun, as it is said. I was like, oh yes, remember the Kenyan parliamentarian? Her name is Millie Odhiambo.
When you are urging me to be a good example to the girls, the younger ones who are doing their first term, Mr. Speaker, if they are good girls, they'll never get corner office. Be as bad as Millie Odhiambo, you will be the mother of this house. So do not be cheated like the African culture, where you are told have decorum, be nice. I'm telling you, you will go nowhere. Be a bad girl like me.
And I thought to myself, that is the original Betty.
Saturday and Sunday mornings belong to the Morning Switch. 3 to 6 a.m. Central African Time. Start your day right with Channel Africa Breakfast.
That smells delicious.
Live 5 days a week.
Right, it's time now for a roundup of key stories that have been shaping the Central Africa region, from political tensions in Côte d'Ivoire ahead of the October presidential elections to worsening humanitarian conditions for Congolese refugees in Burundi. Central Africa remains the heart of some of the continent's most complex geopolitical challenges. And to unpack these developments and more, we're now joined by Aaron Mugambi, who's a geopolitical analyst focused on African affairs and a columnist for the Mail and Guardian in South Africa. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, Aaron. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Peter, and good morning to your listeners.
So let's start with Côte d'Ivoire. The opposition parties are calling for urgent electoral reforms ahead of the October 25 presidential vote. What's prompting these calls, and how significant is the removal of certain candidates from the electoral roll?
Well, the developments in Côte d'Ivoire are not very unusual. I think that we've seen similar patterns of electoral concerns ahead of elections in most African countries. So what we have in Côte d'Ivoire is a situation where the opposition political parties have come together, formed a coalition, and with that coalition, they're trying to raise concerns about the Electoral Commission and some of its practices. We do know that some of these opposition leaders have been removed from the electoral list, and that there are some unfortunate rumors that the elections may not be free and fair. And so the opposition are calling for dialogue between them and the Electoral Commission, as well as the ruling party in government. So this is what has inspired the developments that we are seeing from Côte d'Ivoire. But like I say, they're not unique just to Côte d'Ivoire. We've seen similar events across the continent. But Côte d'Ivoire goes to the elections this year. And so it is very important that these reforms are actually done so that it restores confidence in the electoral process as well as in the Electoral Commission by the people of Côte d'Ivoire.
Given the past and current climate, what are your thoughts about their ability to deliver a credible, stable election?
I think that the Ouattara regime is very uninspiring, for lack of a better term. There's been a lot of concerns about the things that he promised that he would do coming into office, and including the fact that he was only supposed to be president for 2 terms and then went ahead to remove term limits. So I think the credibility of the regime is in question, but we hope that everything goes accordingly and that the regime will respond favorably to these concerns by the opposition, because these are legitimate concerns.
All right, let's turn our attention to Burundi, where we believe thousands of Congolese refugees are reportedly living in dire conditions at the Musenyi settlement site. What do we know about the situation on the ground and how the Burundian government is responding?
The situation on the ground in Burundi is dire when it comes to the refugees. Some of them are living in schools, in campsites, and I know that there is a stadium that is supposed to host, or at least has the capacity of 10,000 people, but over 18,000 refugees are stationed, or at least living there for now. And so the conditions are unfavorable. As even the Human Rights Commission, United Nations Human Rights for Refugee, has actually cited the same concerns. There is problems of sanitation, especially with the rainy season. There's concerns about increased cases of malaria because of stagnation of water, and so that breeds mosquitoes. There is concerns about drainages. There are concerns about toilets, and that if there's an outbreak of cholera, that could be devastating. So the government of Burundi is doing everything it can to provide all these basic necessities for the refugees. And the United Nations seems to be helping through the United Nations Commission on Refugees. But the problem is that the efforts are still not meeting the demands or the needs on the ground. So there's need for more to be done. The regime is trying in Burundi.
So, not too far away, Rwanda's foreign minister recently suggested that a final peace agreement to resolve the Eastern DRC crisis might be signed mid-June in Washington. What do we know about the proposed deal, and who are the key players involved in this? And I suspect there's probably some important players not at the table.
Very true. Well, what we know about this is, number one, if this ceasefire is achieved, it's going to address, of course, the crisis of refugees in Burundi. It will bring stability to the region. The fighting will end between the M23 rebels and the government of the DRC. But the content of this proposed deal that is to be signed in June in Washington, D.C., has not been availed to anyone. In fact, the Donald Trump African Affairs envoy, or the envoy to Africa for Donald Trump, suggested that he's okay with the terms that are in this deal and that they meet the aspiration of both sides, even though both the Rwandese and the Congolese have affirmed that they have not published any content to the deal, and there's nothing really on the table besides the fact that they're working on something that could produce a deal. So I don't think that anyone is privy to this content, but we hope that it can bring about a lasting settlement, even though other talks have been going on between the parties involved outside, without the Americans, in Doha and other places.
It does seem, though, that without the M23 front and center of any kind of deal, they're really just, moving deck chairs on the Titanic, because it seems that the M23 are the main proponents of the insurgency in the eastern part of the country, but there are also other groups. Has this Washington deal got real legs, in your view?
Well, that's a very good question, Peter, because the elephant in the room is the M23. Now, remember, Washington has accused Rwanda, not just Washington, but also the United Nations have accused Rwanda as being the sponsors, the funders, and the ones behind M23. So I would guess that the rationale behind having all these parties to the deal, except the M23 in Washington, D.C., is that if they can get Rwanda to stop funding M23, maybe they can achieve a settlement. But you are right. The M23 are the major player on this in this puzzle. This is why, if you recall, that even the talks in Angola, in the capital city there in Luanda, and also in Kenya and other places where the African heads of governments and African heads of states tried to bring Congo and Rwanda, Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame together to discuss this. One of the sticking issue was the fact that the other side did not want the M23 on the table, while the other side was advocating that the M23 should sit on the table as well, because they're party to this conflict. They are the ones displacing people and killing people in the eastern DR Congo. So that's a very sticky point, but it seems like this much talked about possible deal in Washington, D.C. excludes the M23 coming to the table, and thinking that if they can bring Rwanda to accept this deal, perhaps Rwanda will stop funding or sponsoring the M23 rebels.
And as you alluded a short while ago, there are a number of efforts from different parts of the world and the continent to try and solve the issues in the DRC. It seems to me it will be difficult to get one deal done in Washington, and yet if discussions are happening in Doha and there's no agreement there, surely all of these need to be coordinated somewhere centrally.
Absolutely. I think that's a valid point. Well, what is sad for me is the fact that we saw African presidents and heads of states who tried to bring these two together. Respectively, I am referring to the president of the DR Congo and the president of Rwanda. And in all efforts, I think in 3 or 4 different occasions, these two presidents, these two parties could not even meet eye to eye. In one instance, you see President Paul Kagame show up and Tshisekedi does not show up. But what was interesting to see was how the people in Qatar, the government of Qatar, called for this meeting and called for the parties to come to the table, and both President Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame showed up almost without any hesitation. And it seems like this is a problem we have in Africa, because we seem to have so much respect for outsiders to settle our scores and intervene in our conflicts rather than finding homegrown solutions to the problems that we have. So Paul Kagame and Tshisekedi both showed up in Qatar, in Doha, and that is how the talks began there. But you're right. There is need for a coordinated effort. There is need for all of these talks to come to one agreement under one supervision, and hopefully that all of these talks that have been going on previously or going on the sides can all understand that this needs to be consolidated and produce one singular result.
All right, let's talk energy cooperation now. Zambia has approved a $270 million high voltage transmission line to connect Northwestern Province to the DRC. What's the strategic significance of this interconnector project for both countries?
Well, for the longest time, we know that the mines in the DR Congo are actually one of the consumers of power that comes from not only Zambia, but the other countries in the region. And for the longest time, there's been need to enhance this kind of trade between the two countries. Now, what's been happening in the past is that Zambia has had a real shortage in terms of power and energy. Right now, as we speak, the president of Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema, and his government have actually approached this issue of power almost as if it is an energy crisis. Because of the last 2 years, the country has experienced severe drought. And as you know, Zambia depends on hydroelectricity, and there has been massive load shedding. Now, this load shedding began even way before this regime came into power. We can go back to 2019, 2020 with the previous regime in Zambia. But this is a significant development in the energy sector. If this interconnector, this Kalumbila and Kolwezi interconnector project is actualized with the $270 million pumped into it, it will not only give life to the mines in the DR Congo that needs this energy desperately, but it can also be a source of energy supply for what Zambia needs, because currently Zambia is in a terrible crisis in terms of power, in terms of load shedding.
Yeah, and I'm astonished. I was just looking at some statistics now, and the national electrification rate in Zambia is just 45%. Yes, 86% in urban areas, but rural areas, 14 to 15%. So they hardly are electrified, and they're still struggling to provide for the very few people that have access to electricity. So it's a very sad story playing out in Zambia.
Absolutely. And this is why you see that this regime is pushing. There's a major shift in terms of policy, pushing for alternative renewable energy. The government is trying by all means to sponsor and help anyone that would go to Zambia and establish solar farms, establish any form of renewable energy so that they can actually offset this dependency on hydropower. Because the last few years have proved that Zambia can no longer rely on hydropower. And indeed, it is true that those statistics reflect what is on the ground. There are just so many rural places and villages that are yet to be electrified in Zambia.
All right, and perhaps finally we go back to Burundi. Parliament there has appointed new leadership to its National Human Rights Commission, and this is amid ongoing criticism from international human rights group. Do you think that this reshuffle will bring real reform?
Actually, there's been criticism of this reshuffle. There are a lot of players that actually suggest that this reshuffle is illegal because the law, according to Burundi, the parliament does not have a mandate to halfway, terminate the tenure of the Human Rights Commission officers in Burundi, but they've gone ahead to do that. And the reason why that has happened, it's because of the criticism of the Human Rights Commission of Burundi against the government. They produced a report in January of this year, which was just damning against the human rights violations of the current government there. So this is the backdrop of why this sudden change. The leader of the Human Rights Commission of Burundi has actually fled the country. And the reason for that, it's because of this report that was published in January, and he's fled in fear of his life. Now, the sad part is that it seems like the president of the National Assembly, he's made it very clear that with this new people that they've appointed to this commission, their mandate is to actually destroy the reputation and also the narrative that's been created by the Human Rights Rapporteur to Burundi. So you can understand that this is a war against Fortune Zongo, who's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to Burundi, and that he is a target now with these people that have come in, because these were specific instructions from the President of the National Assembly to this so-called new Human Rights Commission for Burundi, the ones that have come in, the officers that have come in. And so we're yet to see how that plays out. But there are many people that think that this act in itself is illegal and it's unconstitutional.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Aaron, thank you so much indeed for your analysis and insights. Great talking to you.
Thank you, Peter. Great, and have a wonderful day.
Same to you. That's Aaron Mgambi, who's a geopolitical analyst with a focus on African affairs, talking to us about the issues in Central Africa. Right, let's get back to our news desk, and Onele Nsinsi has your news headlines.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the closing ceremony of the 15th Commonwealth Regional Conference for Heads of Anti-Corruption Agencies in Africa this morning. A study by Ghanaian researchers has revealed that since the introduction of the 1994 free schooling program, the country has recorded substantial increases in enrollment rates at the basic education level. Ghana introduced the free compulsory universal basic education program in 1994, and the 133 cardinals involved in the secretive conclave of the Vatican will return to the Sistine Chapel this morning to vote again on who should be the next pope. Channel Africa News, I am Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Time now to get our first update from the world of sports. Here's Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Very good morning from the sports desk. Now, Arsenal's European dream was ended by goals from Fabian Ruiz as well as Achraf Hakimi, who earned Paris Saint-Germain a 2-1 win on the night and set up a spot in the Champions League final against Inter Milan. Now, the Gunners came into that match needing to overturn a 1-0 loss from the first home game to book a place in the final against Inter Milan. But while Arsenal created a number of good opportunities, they could not find a way past PSG keeper Gianluigi Donnarumma until Bukayo Saka's late strike. By then, goals from Ruiz as well as Hakimi had put the French champions well on their way to a 2-1 second leg success and 3-1 on aggregate. Let's hear from Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta.
Well, first of all, congratulate PSG for reaching the final. The assessment, I will make it when I'm a little bit cooler. But the feedback that I got is straight away from their bench is that we were much better than them. When you look at the 2 games, who's been their best player on the pitch? He's been their goalkeeper. He's made a difference for them in the tie. And I think we were very close, much closer than our results showed. But unfortunately, we are out. I'm very proud of the players, what we've done today, the way we started, how we handled the pressure, the amount of pressure. After 20 minutes, it should be 3-0.
On to this now. Amajita head coach Raymond Mdaka is not getting carried away by his team's emphatic 4-1 win over AFCON Under-20 Group A leaders Sierra Leone at the Swiss Canal Stadium. Now the win sees Amajita moving to second spot in the group with about 6 points, just a point behind Sierra Leone. We have played all 4 of their matches. Now coming into that game, Sierra Leone were unbeaten with about 2 wins as well as a draw. Amajita had to be strategic in their approach after an early goal in the first half. Mdaka says it was very important for his Chargers to manage the game in the second half.
Always in a plan even before we go to the game, but what made us a bit relaxed, it's struggling a bit in the first half with that goal that we scored when they were trying to put pressure for us. When we came back in the second half, we were able to settle. See, when you come back and settle out of pressure, then it gives courage to say we still has it, and indeed it worked for us. We were able to score a number of goals in the second half, and it's quite a good result, and it's a motivation on its own for the boys.
All right, so next for Mdaka as well as his team will be a COSAFA derby against Zambia on Friday in Cairo, and to seal qualification to the quarterfinals, they need to avoid a loss against the Zambians.
Yeah, you see, we always stick to the plan. We knew we are in a group of 5 teams, so the plan should be, irrespective of maybe getting the results, you need to play all the games, and you give respect to any other team that is there. And you could see we still need more because we lost 1 against Egypt, and for us to be sure of qualifying, so it means we'll still approach Zambia the same, with the same mentality, same attitude, same understanding of saying when we get inside the field of play, this is how we play. So we will do the same.
On to cricket news now. India captain Rohit Sharma has retired from Test cricket but will continue to play one-day internationals. It comes after reports in the India media on Wednesday that the 38-year-old would be removed as the captain for the Test series in England. Rohit will continue to play ODIs and remain the captain in that format, having won the Champions Trophy in March of this year. So he retired from T20 internationals after winning the 2024 T20 World Cup. Rohit has played 67 Test matches and has been India's captain since replacing Virat Kohli back in 2022. He also won half of his 24 Test matches as the captain, giving him the best win percentage as India captain behind Kohli, and also reached the final of the World Test Championship in 2023, where India lost to Australia. But just last year, Rohit Sharma oversaw a 3-0 home defeat by New Zealand, India's first Test series defeat at home for 12 years, as well as a 3-1 loss in the Beda Gavaskar Trophy against Australia. Now, Rohit was dropped for the decisive 5th Test in Sydney after a run of poor form. The elegant right-hander retires having made 4,301 Test runs on an average of 40.57 with about 12 centuries. His top score of 212 runs against South Africa in Ranchi back in 2019, scored of just 255 balls. And finally, South Africa's Proteas women's cricket team went down by 23 runs in a high-scoring one-day international tri-series encounter against India at the R. Premadasa International Cricket Stadium on Wednesday. The result ruled South Africa out of contention for a place in Sunday's final. India set up an imposing total of 337 for 9, powered by a century from Jeremiah Rodriguez, as well as a 50 from Deepti Sharma. In response, the Proteas fought greatly but were restricted to about 314 for 7, bolstered by innings from Annery Drexen, as well as the stand-in captain Chloe Traon. The Proteas women will complete their Tri-Series campaign with a final round-robin match against the host side Sri Lanka on Friday. And that concludes your sports news Asawa. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu Di Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Parlez-vous couramment le français? Êtes-vous passionné par la radio? Et êtes-vous qualifié pour travailler en Afrique du Sud? Envoyez-nous votre CV et vos 3 minutes démo en MP3 à @channelafrica.co.za pour avoir une chance de rejoindre la famille Channel Africa. Si vous n'avez pas de réponse après 14 jours, cela signifie que vous n'avez pas été retenu. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Right, let's catch you up on what's been happening in the world of business and economics as we say good morning to Chanduko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Peter and Asanda. Good morning. Ivory Coast, the world's biggest cashew grower, has raised its projected output to 1.3 million metric tons from 1.15 million tons, even as potential U.S. tariffs and a falling dollar drag down exports. Mamadou Beda of the Cotton and Cashew Council says the production increase stems in part from curbs on the smuggling of raw cashews to neighboring Ghana and Burkina Faso. Beda adds that at the same time, Vietnamese buyers have drastically cut purchases of Ivorian raw cashews for processing in response to U.S. tariffs. Morocco's Casablanca Stock Exchange CSE expects to launch a new derivatives market within weeks as part of an effort to boost liquidity in one of Africa's largest exchanges. CSE Chief Executive Tariq Senhaji says derivatives will expand the investor base by allowing participants to take long and short positions and enable them to trade a basket, particularly tracking the MASI 20, which includes the 20 largest and most liquid stocks. The derivative offerings are aimed at being the first part of a broader expansion with contracts for interest rate futures, single stock futures, and equity options set to follow. South Africa has been ranked 60th out of 158 countries in the newly released 2025 Illicit Trade Environment Index by Traceit. The index is said to be a reminder of how corruption, weak enforcement, and policy blind spots continue to fuel illicit trade and undermine public health, safety, and the economy. The 2025 Illicit Trade Environment Index by Traceit reveals how corruption, poor enforcement, and regulatory gaps continue to fuel trade globally. Director of Illicit Trade, Philip van Gils.
South Africa, and I would take, for instance, some of the taxation and economic environment, regulatory framework, trade, customs and borders, and some of the areas of improvements, which are, for instance, criminal enablers of illicit trade, or the supply chain intermediaries, and the sectorial illicit trade indicators.
China and the U.S. are to hold their first talks about tariffs since President Trump started a trade war. The U.S. introduced a 145% tariffs on Chinese imports last month, while China retaliated with 125% on American goods. The BBC's Celia Hatton has the details.
Beijing said it was attending the negotiations in Switzerland at the United States' request, but any form of pressure or coercion will not work on China. Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who is set to meet the Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, told Fox News the talks were about de-escalation, not working out a big trade deal. But behind the scenes, both countries are feeling the bite of high tariffs. Some Chinese factories have already slowed down because of the trade war, and shipments into America's biggest port, Los Angeles, are expected to drop by a third this week.
The US dollar rose against the safe haven yen and Swiss franc while steadying versus the euro as investors looked towards the impending outcome of the Federal Reserve policy meeting later in the session and tariff negotiations. U.S. Treasury prices rose on Tuesday, this as a well-received auction of the benchmark 10-year note suggested demand for treasuries remained intact after a trade war shook investor confidence in U.S. assets. Let's have a look at financial indicators this morning. $1 in Nigeria is at 1,000 naira 606, in Botswana 13 pula 47, Kenya the dollar is at 128 shilling 403, Zambia 29 kwacha 95. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 72, Russia 80 rubles 94, India 84 rupee 70, China 71 22, South Africa $1 is at 18 rand 23, $1 is at 74 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. Commodities, gold is at $3,398, platinum at $984 per ounce, the price of Brent crude oil $61.53 a barrel. That's all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
Right, let's take a look at today's G20 fact of the morning. The G20 consists of two parallel tracks, which are the Sherpa and finance tracks. The Sherpa track consists of working groups that are focused on socio-economic issues such as agriculture, anti-corruption, climate, digital economy, education, employment, energy, environment, health, tourism, trade and investment. The finance track, headed by finance ministers and central bank governors, relates to fiscal and monetary policy issues such as the global economy, infrastructure, financial regulation, inclusion, IFA, as well as taxation. And that is our G20 fact for the morning.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
The conclave to elect a new pope to lead the world's 1.4 billion Roman Catholics is underway at the Vatican. We'll get to that story in just a bit. Before we get into that chat, and we'll be speaking in terms of the process and how it will take several days in terms of where 133 cardinals from around the world are going to elect a new pope. But first, let's come to this story.
Yeah, African Union Development Agency says that African countries must work with banks to dismantle red tapes hindering female entrepreneurs to access funding access. The union, which joined G20 member states in 2023, is part of the delegates attending the G20 Global Conference on Financial Inclusion and Women Empowerment in the South African town of Rustenburg, and that's east of Johannesburg. Tsolofelo Mokhami has more.
A call for banks to remove barriers that hinder women from access business funding. Head of Youth, Gender and Women Empowerment of AU Development Agency, Jessica Ano, had this to say.
We need to work with the banks to de-risk women's businesses to make sure we have specific products for women. But we also need to support women collectives. We need to support building women banks, having such big and strong financial champion at country level that women do no longer suffer, be able to access finance.
A delegate from UN Women, Tsorofatso Diphukwani, emphasized the importance of women in leadership and global knowledge sharing.
We have a lot of programs that really hone in of, women that are in, various rural areas, and one of which is the entrepreneur program, of which I'm a program analyst of. So this program is a part economic empowerment, a broader program that we have at UN Women. What it does is it is a program that is funded by the De Beers Group. It is implemented by United Nations Women Samco in collaboration with our two partners, the Musina and the Bloberg municipalities.
The World Bank stressed that access to finance must be coupled with skills development. Senior Knowledge Officer Felicia Sechrist elaborates.
Evidence also shows that access to finance interventions is not enough to improve business growth for women entrepreneurs, but they must be combined with access to skills interventions, such as training, as well as access to markets interventions.
South Africa's G20 presidency, predecessor Brazil, says these engagements will guide the G20 member states' second technical meeting. Maria Helen Guarezi, through an interpreter, explains.
Women can ascend on the spaces of power and decision making. And lastly, we understand that this conference that comes before the GT, the working group meeting, it's critical for add value knowledge of other countries and entities, organizations are doing to help us in the thinking that will come tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
The 2 days second G20 technical meeting is expected to start on Thursday. I'm Solofelo Mohami in Rustenburg.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine, weekdays 6 till 9 Central African Time on Channel Africa.
Right now, let's get to that story on the Catholic conclave. And the conclave is to elect a new pope to lead the world's 1.4 billion Roman Catholics, and it's underway at the Vatican. The doors of the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican were closed on Wednesday, signaling the start of a secret conclave where 133 cardinals from around the world will elect a new pope. The result of the first vote is expected soon, but the process could take several days. To help us better understand what is involved is Father Russell Pollitt, Jesuit priest and parish priest of Holy Trinity Church in Braamfontein. Father, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Asanda.
Let's start by getting background in terms of the formation of the conclave over the position, its mandate.
Sorry, Asanda, can you just repeat that, the second part of that question?
In terms of background on the formation of the conclave over the years, let's talk about that background in terms of its composition and its mandate.
So, Asanda, the conclave is made up of cardinals who are appointed by the Pope. This is a privileged position that the Pope chooses these people from around the world, and the role of those cardinals is really to help the Pope to run the church, and of course their most important thing is to elect a Pope. And so at the moment we have a college of cardinals that is very diverse. Pope Francis left us a much more diverse college, appointing cardinals from places in the world that had never had a cardinal before. So for a number of countries like Central African Republic, like Haiti, like Myanmar, these places suddenly have someone in the conclave for the first time in history. So we've got a very diverse group of people at the moment, 133 of them in Rome in that conclave.
So that's how then it has evolved over the years, you would say. It's more diverse. There are places in the world that had never had cardinal representation before, now having that representation.
Yes, so for the last 750 years, these cardinals have voted like this. Before that, the cardinals were people that were appointed from Rome only, who came together to vote for the Bishop of Rome. The Pope is also the Bishop of Rome. But for the last 750 years, these cardinals have been chosen from all over the world, but we had a real dominance of Europe and really the Northern Hemisphere. What's happened in the last, I would say, 7 to 8 years is Pope Francis has really diversified that. And we'll see, for example, that there are more cardinal electors now from places like Africa and Asia than we have ever seen in history.
Yeah. We understand that an oath of secrecy is taken as part of the election process, but what can you tell us about the procedures involved and typically time frames given for each stage?
So yesterday they entered that Sistine Chapel and they all took this oath of secrecy. Now the oath of secrecy is not really kind of clandestine in any way. What they're basically saying is they're not going to go outside and talk about who they voted for, and that what happens within that Sistine Chapel at this time of voting in terms of numbers and candidates is not going to be something that's broadcast. Obviously, stories about what happened in there always come out because the cardinals come out and they talk about perhaps, how long things took or why things took as long as they did. So that's really what the oath is about. The other part of the oath is an oath of fidelity to elect someone in their own conscience. Mm-hmm. And they actually say this. They say, "This is my judgment before God, who is my judge." So to elect not maybe a personality or a person from a certain part of the world, but to elect the person that they believe is the best person for that role at the moment to be the Pope. So those electors entered the Sistine Chapel yesterday. The doors were closed. They have had their iPads, iPhones, everything taken away. They have no contact with the outside world now until they actually have elected a Pope. What they do is they are each given a ballot. They come forward one by one once they've written the name of the person they would like to see as Pope or they believe should be Pope on that ballot. They put the ballot in a big chalice at the front of the Sistine Chapel on the altar. Then there are 3 scrutineers. So one person would take it, they would look at it, they would pass it on to the next one, they'd look at the name, and the third person reads the name out loud. And when they have a 2/3 majority, that person will be the Pope. Now, a 2/3 majority at the moment means that out of 133, 89 have to vote for one single candidate. If they do vote for someone and they do get that 2/3 majority, they do 2 things. And do you accept to be Pope? If he says yes, the second question will be, what name do you want to be known as? Because popes take the name of saints, and he will give his name. And then he goes into a little room on the side of the Sistine Chapel, which is called the Room of Tears, where he will change from the red robes into the white robes. And the Italians call it the Room of Tears because apparently many people who do go in there, many popes, to change, they do shed some tears when they are overwhelmed by emotion and they realize the great responsibility that has been put on their shoulders. Once they've changed into the white robes, they'll come back into the Sistine Chapel. All the cardinals will come forward to greet the new pope and to give him their obedience. And then the rest of the world will know, because the Pope will appear on the balcony at St. Peter's. You said, how long is this process going to be? On average, the last 4 conclaves have been 2 days. I suspect this one is probably going to be a bit longer. If I were a betting man, I would say 3 days.
So what are the factors that are considered outside of the candidate in terms of the voting or selection process? Things like family history, previous parishes that were possibly led by the cardinal, educational background and things like that, and other work experience?
Great question, Asanda. So they would be considering a number of things. They would first of all be considering, remember the cardinals have been meeting for the last 10 days or so, every single day, sometimes twice a day, to discuss what kind of leader the Catholic Church needs now. So they'll be looking for someone that obviously they think fits that leadership that they see the church needs, the skills that that person needs. They would be looking at someone who probably, depending on which side of the spectrum the cardinal is, someone who could either carry forward the legacy of Pope Francis, or maybe if they feel the church needs to go on a different trajectory, they would choose someone who they feel could lead down whichever road they feel as a group the church needs to go at this time. So the man's personality would play a role. I think, someone who probably has had a pastoral experience. I mean, that was the big difference between Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. Pope Benedict XVI spent most of his life working in universities and also working in the Vatican Central Office in Rome, whereas Pope Francis, we know, spent most of his life working as a bishop in a diocese amongst ordinary, mostly poor people. So the background of the man is also going to play a role. The gifts of the man, I think, are going to be important. Obviously, they want someone who's going to be able to lead. They want someone who's going to be able to communicate well with the world. They want someone who's going to probably have knowledge of the global context, because at the moment, we know that our world is in a very precarious state. We've just seen the outbreak of war, maybe in India and Pakistan. We know of the conflicts in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Congo. A pope who can speak into those so someone who's got a global view as well, I think will be important. Right. I think they'll also be looking for someone who speaks languages, someone who is multilingual, because I think in that role now in the world, you can't just have someone who's got one language. You're going to need someone who is multilingual.
Right. Well, thank you again, Father, for your time. We appreciate it, and God bless.
Thank you so much, and all the best to you and your listeners.
Thanks. Father Russell Pollitt is a Jesuit priest and a parish priest of Holy Trinity Church in Braamfontein. We'll be unpacking the story a little further in terms of the next hour, speaking to other contributors. But that's what we can look forward to in this next hour as we enter the second hour of Africa Rise and Shine. We say good morning.
I must admit, I'm getting quite excited now, actually. I mean, this is a major
event. You want to see who the new Pope will be?
Yeah. It could happen today. You never know.
Yeah, we never know.
We'll have to see. All right, it's 7 o'clock. It's time for your news. Here is Onelen Sinsi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the closing ceremony of the 15th Commonwealth Regional Conference for heads of anti-corruption agencies in Africa this morning. The 5-day conference is taking place in Cape Town. Retired Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and Justice and Constitutional Development Minister Mamuluko Kubai were amongst the speakers at the conference this week. Both reflected on the necessity of the Commission of Inquiry into state capture headed by Zondo from 2018 to 2022 and the ongoing fight against corruption in the country. Meanwhile, South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party leader Julius Malema has condemned the British High Commission's failure to process his visa application to the United Kingdom. Malema was supposed to address students at the 11th annual Cambridge Africa Together conference at the Cambridge University this week, and he has taken to social media to express his frustration. The EFF says this is nothing more than an expression of a bureaucratic process being used to suppress political dissent. Kylie Kumalo reports.
The EFF says it's well aware that this is a reflection of the imperialism against Julius Malema, who has been a strong and critical voice against the United Kingdom for its role in the atrocities of colonialism, particularly its role of the British monarchy in the slave trade and its role in the genocide of Palestinians. The party says it will never be discouraged from building global solidarity against imperialism and capitalism. The EFF has blasted the British High Commission in Pretoria, saying it's delayed the processing of the visa application, and it has notified them that the visa will not be processed on time.
South Africa's Border Management Authority Commissioner Michael Masiapato has issued a stern warning to criminal syndicates. Officers have intercepted various attempts to smuggle high-value assets suspected to be linked to transactional crime syndicates attempting to smuggle them into neighboring countries. Masiapato has commended the officers. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Memi Mokotsi explains.
The Border Management Authority has sent a stern warning to criminal syndicates and reported that on the 5th of May, BMA border guards at Kosi Bay intercepted and recovered 3 high-value assets suspected to be linked to transnational crime syndicates attempting to smuggle them into neighboring countries. While conducting such operations at the customs inspection on that Monday morning, the BMA border guards uncovered a black Senk motorbike frame concealed inside a trailer. The frame matched details from a pending police case of a stolen motorbike in Mayville.
A study by researchers has revealed that since the introduction of the 1994 free schooling program, the country has recorded substantial increases in enrollment rates at the basic education level. Ghana introduced the free compulsory universal basic education program in 1994. This meant that families could send children to public schools without paying school fees. In 2005, it introduced the capitation grant scheme to further reduce financial barriers to education and increase access. The senior lecturer at the University of Ghana, Paul Kyer, elaborates.
So it is well known in the academic literature that there's something that is called the quality-quantity trade-off. So when you add more quantity, sometimes you may lose quality. So we bring it to the education, but you don't increase the number of classrooms, schools, teachers, books, etc. to keep up with the numbers, and quality is likely to decline. And so one of the things that inspired this was because in Ghana we were expanding to free secondary education. And so we wanted to just get a sense of, okay, so how did the free education at the lower level pan out in terms of learning out? So that's really what started it all.
And lastly, the 133 cardinals involved in the secretive conclave at the Vatican will return to the Sistine Chapel this morning to vote again on who should be the next Pope. Last night, thick black smoke could be seen rising from the chimney of the chapel, signaling that the cardinals had not reached an agreement during their first ballot. The BBC's Mariam Mosheri.
After the first vote of the conclave, no pope has been elected. We saw earlier black smoke billowing out of that chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel. It was a long wait, though, for those tens of thousands of people who had come to St. Peter's Square to watch that chimney, and for us watching it here.
For any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us at +27 11 714 4459. Channel Africa News, I am Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, an emotional Mikel Arteta insists Gianluigi Donnarumma was the difference in their loss to PSG in the UEFA Champions League semi-final second leg last night, while South Africa defeat to India rules them out of contention for a place in the final of the ODI Tri-Series. Details of these and other stories coming up at 7:30.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
A study by Ghanaian researchers has revealed that since the introduction of the 1994 free schooling program, the country has recorded substantial increases in enrollment rates at the basic education level. Ghana introduced the free compulsory universal basic education program in 1994. This meant that families could send children to public schools without paying school fees. In 2005, it introduced the capitation grant scheme to further reduce financial barriers to education and increase access. For more on the findings, from Pearl Kai, who is senior lecturer at the University of Ghana.
What inspired this research was trying to understand how free education policies are working. So this is set in Ghana, but definitely is applicable to other countries that are implementing free education policies. So it is well known in the academic literature that there's something that is called the quality-quantity trade-off. And I'm sure people know about it in other settings. So when you add more quantity, sometimes you may lose quality. So we bring it to the education, but you don't increase the number of classrooms, schools, teachers, books, etc. to keep up with the numbers, and quality is likely to decline. And so one of the things that inspired this was because in Ghana we were expanding to free secondary education. And so we wanted to just get a sense of, okay, so how did the free education at the lower levels pan out in terms of learning outcomes? So that's really what started it all. We see that there has been some decline in the quality after the quantities increase. So that's how we started. And then we luckily there was already a survey conducted 10 years apart in Ghana. So we were able to use that data because one was conducted maybe a few years after the implementation of the capitation grants, which was supposed to help schools to eliminate tuition, but enroll as many children as would want to attend. So that's how we went about it.
And what would you say were the key findings?
Yeah, so the key findings, which of course is concerning, is that if you look at the findings, so if you compare, the first survey was conducted in 2006, and the next one now 2016. And what we found is that within that decade, the likelihood of being able to read and the likelihood of being able to perform a written calculation actually declined for people with less than upper secondary. So the people who had primary education or lower secondary education were less likely to be able to read a very short sentence or to answer a written calculation over the 10-year period. And this is something that we are attributing, could be likely to the fact that the increase in the quantity of people that were going to school was not matched by the same increase in the input. And I mean, understandably, in our resource-constrained context, it's not so easy to say that maybe for every additional child that we enroll, we are going to increase the amount of input. It's understandable, but it's really something we want to highlight, that if we want to make sure that everybody goes to school, it is very important that we are ready to invest all the resources to make sure that everybody that goes actually gets out of education what it is that they are being sent to school for.
So would you say since the introduction of free basic education program, it's working?
No, so the answer is in two parts. It's working in the sense that, yes, so now more children are going to school more than ever, but the concern is the decline in the literacy and the numeracy. Because ultimately, you don't want people to go to school just because they are going to school. You want them to go to school to develop skills that they can use to impact, the labor force, become productive citizens, and drive development. So if you have more people going to school, but in the long term, the literacy and the numeracy is declining, then it's a problem. And even in our study, we only looked at very basic literacy and numeracy. Read a sentence. Can you answer a written calculation? But in the real world, you actually need far more than that to succeed in the 21st century labor market. So that is what we want to highlight, that it's really not just about having more children going to school. And it's not just a Ghana problem or even a Southern African problem. There's globally what is called the global learning crisis. And that is the issue that people are grappling with. Okay, more people than ever are going to school, but we find that learning outcomes are actually declining. So we need to pay attention to that.
Does the research offer any recommendations then as to how then the government needs to go about addressing this decline in numeracy literacy?
Yes, so the recommendation is that the free education policies to truly succeed in terms of both increasing the number that attend school and keeping the level of the quality, we need to invest more in it. So if you understand that this year we are rolling out, a free education policy, we should be ready to commit more teachers, more classrooms, more books. I mean, I know it's a lot of money, but once you start, it should be something that we should really keep in mind. Okay, to keep up the quality, if I'm going to, increase the number of children by maybe, let's say, 1,000 this year, then I need to make sure that I also increase the budget accordingly. It's a tough decision, but it's really what needs to be done.
That was Pearl Kai, senior lecturer at the University of Ghana. She was speaking to Ndlandla Mahlangu.
Sur Channel Africa.
Nous étions en train de savourer la chanson Démocratie.
Démocratie.
Ça veut dire quoi?
Démocratie, déjà, ça dérive de démocratie, qui est le régime dans lequel nous sommes, dans notre pays. Mais j'ai plutôt pensé que nous sommes plutôt dans une démocratie.
Pourquoi?
Où il y a une cruauté tellement... une méchanceté des dirigeants envers la population. En fait, dans cette chanson, je suis en train de blâmer tout le monde. Je blâme et les dirigeants, qui pour moi sont des démocrates.
Oh, je suis maintenant en train de comprendre. Donc, démocratie. Oh
Annika Longi, tous les dimanches sur Mix Vibration.
Bringing you the energy, news, and good vibes to kickstart your day. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Well, as you can imagine, the world is watching the Vatican, where the process to elect a new leader of the Roman Catholic Church is underway. Black smoke has emerged from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel on Wednesday evening, a clear signal that the first round of voting of the College of Cardinals has not yet produced a new pope. Perhaps not surprising, this centuries-old ritual continues behind closed doors, with cardinals worldwide now entering their second day of deliberations. Well, for the latest, let's go to St. Peter's Square, where we're joined live from Rome by SABC News correspondent Trent Murray. Trent, top of the morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning. It's a beautiful sunny day here in the Italian capital, and we're ready for our second round of voting.
So tell us a little bit about the atmosphere around the Vatican this morning, especially after the first round of voting. I suppose nobody really expected a result on day one.
It would have been very unusual, I think, for them to come to a decision in that first round. I mean, around 80% of these cardinals were appointed by Pope Francis and don't necessarily know each other. They probably need a little bit more time to work out who the front runners are and the potential other names in the mix. So certainly there was around 30,000 people in St. Peter's Square last night, eagerly awaiting, watching that chimney for the smoke, but when it eventually came, I don't think there was any surprises. But today could be a decisive day, I think, because we now have 4 rounds of voting, so they'll have 4 attempts at this. So they quite quickly, you would imagine, will start to narrow down some of those front runners today.
But I guess, and the speculation is that it might take a little bit longer than for Pope Francis, partly because this is the largest number of cardinals they've ever had, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's also the most diverse group that we've really ever seen. And last time they met to elect Pope Francis, there was just 48 countries represented. This time around, it's 71. In fact, there's been a big increase in the number of African countries represented. And a lot of that is the work of Pope Francis appointing more cardinals in other parts of the world. Europe's representation has dropped, while Asia, South America, and Africa has increased, and a number of countries have got a cardinal for the first time. I mean, South Sudan, Ghana, Cape Verde, Rwanda, Central African Republic, all being represented for the first time in that conclave, and so it's expected Africa will have a pretty big voice in those deliberations.
What do we know about what happens behind the scenes? I mean, is there lobbying that takes place, or is each cardinal literally an individual that makes up his mind each vote?
It's very difficult to know, because they're sealed off in the Sistine Chapel. That's where they vote and they discuss. And they take a vow of secrecy to never reveal what's discussed in that room. So it's not the done thing for a cardinal to be seen sort of publicly campaigning for the job, but this is still a political process at the end of the day. So you would imagine there are factions and groups working to try and get a potential candidate up, but it's very hard to know. It's a real mystery what's discussed in that room, because we just don't know.
People are talking about prominent front runners. I mean, how do they come up with these names? How does one get a sense that this guy seems to be in the forefront? I don't understand that.
Yeah, again, it's a little bit of a mystery. I mean, I guess, this is a political process at the end of the day. So some of those front runners are considered front runners perhaps because of their charisma, their backing from their countries. It could be some because of their views, I mean, obviously within the Catholic Church, you have a division between people who want a more sort of progressive church, following in the footsteps of Pope Francis, and those who want a sort of more traditional, conservative approach. And so that's why some of those names will get thrown into the mix based on their sort of mantra and their philosophy of how they want to run the church. It might be some of their issues on controversial issues like the blessing of same-sex unions or ordaining women into the priesthood, those sorts of things. That can garner attention. But what I would say just briefly is that a lot of church insiders say you have to be careful with the front-runner names, because quite often the front-runners aren't the ones that are elected. Last time around, Pope Francis was not considered a front-runner. He was a bit of an outsider that came in, so we could see some surprises.
Tell us a little bit more about the atmosphere. Are there lots more people expected today? I mean, this kind of thing doesn't happen every day. So, and especially if you're a devout Catholic, this is probably one of the biggest events that you'll witness in your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really wonderful atmosphere, actually, and there is a real buzz in the city, it has to be said, because, there's a lot of speculation and anticipation. I mean, if you spend time around St. Peter's Square, you see, of course, Catholic faithful, people praying, dancing, singing. They're excited, they're happy. But, of course, we have to remember it's starting to warm up in Europe, and so you have a lot of holiday makers in Rome who are just sort of curious onlookers. They may not be Catholic, but they see this huge spectacle going on and they sort of want to be a part of it. And so it's a really interesting and diverse group of people down there wanting to be a part of this moment in history. And of course, some of the local businesses doing quite well as well. I think the pizzerias are difficult to get a seat at the moment, and some entrepreneurial merchants are selling Vatican souvenirs and merchandise already. So a real buzz.
So what's expected to happen today? Might we get a result today even?
It's possible. I mean, there'll be 4 rounds of voting, so you would imagine they'll start to kind of filter out the names of those who aren't in the running and those who really are in with a shot. They'll have 4 rounds today. We'll be watching for that smoke, of course, from the chimney. If it's black smoke, then we'll know they haven't got a result yet, and we'll go back and do it all again. If it's white smoke, then we will have a new papal leader. Of course, if they don't get there today, then they come back tomorrow for another 4 rounds of voting. They then take a little break over the weekend and come back on Monday. But the last 7 popes have all been chosen within about 3 days. So it'll start to heat up now, and today could be the day, possibly tomorrow.
All right, Trent, that's where we'll leave it. Thanks so much indeed for that update from Rome. Thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that's SABC News correspondent Trent Murray on the ground watching developments unfold there. So the Cardinals, a record number this year, deciding who is going to be the leader of the Catholic movement around the world. We could get a decision today, but likely, if we follow previous patterns, probably tomorrow.
It's Channel Africa's birthday month. Celebrate Africa's voice with us. Catch us on SABC Plus, DSTV Audio Bouquet 802, and Satellite Channel PAS10. Africa Update on Channel Africa with Lulu Kabu.
The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, reports that over 3 million children are involved in prostitution globally, while the International Labour Organization estimates that 1 million people are trafficked annually for sexual exploitation. Many victims are lured with false promises of a better future.
We have serious problems, Lulu. One, we had porous borders, easy access of these criminal transnational syndicates coming in and living at ease. Number one. Number two, we also have a problem where some of our law enforcement officers, those who are rogue, who work hand in glove with the syndicates because they give them something in return of them turning a blind eye. Point number three, we have a problem of corruption that leads to us being a playground of this transnational organized crime.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time. A fresh morning, a fresh perspective. Stay tuned to Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
As more than 1 billion Catholics around the world await the election of a new pope, all eyes are on the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican in Italy, where 133 cardinals are beginning to secretive process known as a conclave. The conclave was set in motion by the death of Pope Francis last month at the age of 88 years. Francis was elected in 2013, becoming the first ever pope from Latin America. Throughout the week, pilgrims and journalists have been flocking to St. Peter's Square as cardinals hold closed-door meetings discussing church issues and the qualities they want to see in the next pope. In Africa, the question of whether the next pope could come from this continent has been raging. On Wednesday, cardinals took an oath of secrecy as the conclave process unfolds. For another angle to the story, which on the line by Father Smangaliso Mkachwa, who is former secretary of the South African Catholic Bishops' Conference. Father Mkachwa, thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
Very well, thanks yourself, and good morning to our listeners and all those who are interested in your program.
We well, thank you so much for asking. The conclave was set in motion by the death of Pope Francis last month. Do you believe there's interest in installing an African pope at this stage? And what are the chances of this happening if we look at him, the late Pope Francis, having been the first ever pope from Latin America, and maybe that bringing some renewed hope of a possibility that a pope could come from Africa?
Yes, just to put the record straight, if we did get if an African pope were to be elected this time around, he wouldn't be the first, because I think around about 200 and something, I can't remember, but a long time ago, there was an African pope, but that particular one was a typical Roman citizen, so wasn't really a black person. Right, so to come back to your question specifically, yes, I think lots of people in Africa, where the Catholic Church is growing very fast indeed, they would hope for, they would expect that an African pope or candidate for the papacy would be a very good thing to consider, which one would be a recognition of the rapid growth of the African, of the church in Africa, but also the recognition that the Catholic Church is very old in Africa, going right back almost to the 1st or 2nd centuries and so on. So therefore, that would be a recognition and appreciation of who we are. The challenge, though, is that he would have to compete with so many other cardinals coming from the 4 different continents, and but also the reality is that there's a way in which the church has been very much, in a way, under the influence of Europe, and I think the recently Pope Francis, who died, was very conscious of that, and he was trying to make sure that all the people from the various parts of the Catholic Church are represented, that their voices are heard. So yes, everybody would be excited, me included, and but at the same time, one is not naive. It's not going to be quite an easy one. Also, partly to a certain extent for cultural, partly political reasons, because we all come from different continents and represent the interests, the hopes of those various countries.
Well, we've seen diversification within the conclave, as mentioned in our previous chat in the previous hour with Father Russell Pollitt, that in the past 7 to 8 years, especially under the leadership of Pope Francis, there's been quite a diversification. Now, the next question is, if a candidate from Africa isn't installed this time, do you think there would be an urgent need for the leaders of the Catholic Church within the continent to unite in a quest to ensure that the next Pope is from Africa, or maybe represents the world's black population?
Yes, I suppose we're all human beings, and the leaders of the Catholic Church on the African continent, I think they would have an interest in making sure that at some stage, depending, of course, on the Holy Spirit, because the bishops believe that the Holy Spirit guides them, inspires them to make the correct decision. So that basically what the church is looking for is the right kind of leader in the 21st century to deal with all the challenges and issues that face the church today, but also to continue the tradition of the Catholic Church, which is quite a long one. So the struggle continues in a manner of speaking, yes.
So has there ever been a revoting or deviation of appointment of an elected cardinal due to an unreadiness or a refusal to accept the position of Pope?
Not that really I'm aware of, but obviously there have been in the past all kinds of dynamics, but that wouldn't really be an issue at all, and I wouldn't expect it to become a big issue on the African continent. And I think also the fact that Africa, as I say, is not a newcomer to the Catholic Church, and the fact that we also have some cardinals and some bishops who are serving in the higher international offices of the Catholic Church, that also gives hope. But the world has changed, and the world is changing all the time, and I think the bishops and the cardinals will also be sensitive to that.
All right. Well, let's leave it there, Father. Thanks again for your time, and God bless.
No, it's a pleasure, and continue the good work.
Thank you. Father Smangaliso Mkhatshwa is former secretary of the South African Catholic Bishops' Conference. 7:30 is our time now, Central African. Let's say good morning to Onele Nzinzi. She's got our news headlines.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Mali has suspended political activities across the country ahead of a planned protest against the military junta that has ruled since coups in 2020 and 2021. The West African country's political parties are demanding a return to constitutional order and a presidential election. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the closing ceremony of the 15th Commonwealth Regional Conference for heads of anti-corruption agencies in Africa this morning. And the 133 cardinals involved in the secretive conclave at the Vatican will return to the Sistine Chapel this morning to vote again on who should be the next pope. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Right, it's time for us to find out what's been happening in the world of sport. And if you're an Arsenal fan, it was tears last night, I'm afraid, in the Champions League. Let's get the latest with Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning once again from the sports desk. Let's start with some cricket news in the Sawa. So Annery Dirksen scored 81 in the Proteas women's penultimate match of the ODI Tri-Series against India, rubber stamping her position in the team and showcasing exactly why she was recently awarded with a maiden cricket South Africa central contract. Now, Dirksen's efforts were in vain, though, as the team ultimately lost by 23 runs, ending any hopes of making Sunday's final in Colombo. Having been set a massive target of 338 for victory, South Africa fell short yet again, with stand-in captain Chloe Traoré the second highest scorer with 67 runs. Speaking immediately after the match, Dirksen was disappointed to have not gone further in this competition.
Yeah, I think ultimately it doesn't mean much if we still lost. I think the last couple of games I've sort of been saying it, that sort of get out at a crucial stage, and probably just when the team needed me to kick on. So again, disappointed that we didn't get to kick on, but I think it's valuable experience going into possibly next games. And I'll have a look with our batting coach and the analysis, and see where we can get those 1% better and hopefully finish off some games for South Africa.
And Dirksen also lamented the small margins that cost them the match, although they did manage to score over 300 runs. The last time that happened was in June of last year against the same Indian team.
Yeah, I think again we came pretty close to a very big score, so there's some positives to take out of it. I think we're not down. We probably lost it again in small little moments. So yeah, just reflecting on it and looking at those moments and where we can be better, and yeah, just fixing it in the next game. But I think all in all, the team is still in a pretty good space.
On to some, we'll remain with some cricket news. Indian captain Rohit Sharma has retired from Test cricket but will continue to play one-day internationals. It comes after reports in the Indian media on Wednesday that the 38-year-old would be removed as the captain for the Test series in England. Rohit will continue to play ODIs and remain captain in that format, having won the Champions Trophy in March of this year. So he did retire from T20 internationals after winning the 2024 T20 World Cup tournament. Rohit has played 67 Test matches and has also been Indian captain since replacing Virat Kohli in 2022. He won half of his 24 Test matches as the captain, giving him the best win percentage as Indian captain behind Kohli, and also reached the final of the World Test Championship in 2023, where India lost to Australia. But last year, Rohit oversaw a 3-0 home defeat by New Zealand, India's first Test series defeat at home in 12 years and 3-1 loss in the Beda Gavaskar Trophy against Australia. Rohit was dropped for the decisive 5th Test in Sydney after a poor run of form. The elegant right-hander retires having made 4,301 Test runs and an average of 40.57 with about 12 centuries. His top score was 212 against South Africa in Ranchi in 2019, scored of just 255 balls. Well, Peter, you mentioned it. There was a lot of tears for Arsenal fans yesterday. This, of course, after Arsenal's European dream was ended by goals from Fabian Ruiz as well as Achraf Hakimi, who earned Paris Saint-Germain a 2-1 win on the night and to set up a spot in the Champions League final against Inter Milan. The Gunners came into that match needing to overturn a 1-0 loss from the first home leg to book a place in the final against Milan. But while Arsenal created a number of good opportunities, they could not find their way past PSG goalkeeper Gianluigi Donnarumma until Bukayo Saka's late strike. By then, goals from Ruiz as well as Hakimi had put the French champions on their way to a 2-1 second leg success, winning 3-1 on aggregate. Let's hear what Mikel Arteta had to say post that match.
Well, first of all, congratulate PSG for reaching the final. The assessment, I will make it when I'm a little bit cooler, but the feedback that I got is straight away from their bench is that we were much better than them. When you look at the two games, who has been their best player on the pitch, has been their goalkeeper. He's made a difference for them in the tie. And I think we were very close, much closer than our results showed. But unfortunately, we are out. I'm very proud of the players, what we've done today, the way we started, how we handled the pressure, the amount of pressure. After 20 minutes, it should be 3-0.
And finally, Mexico City is gearing up to welcome more than 5 million visitors for the 2025 FIFA World Cup, whose opening match will be played in the sprawling megacity. Authorities having confirmed this on Wednesday. So the top football tournament will be held in Mexico, in the USA as well as Canada. That's, of course, next year, 2026, marking the first time that 3 countries co-host the event. Now, 3 of the 16 venues will be in the Latin American nation, with the central city of Guadalajara, as well as the northern industrial hub of Monterrey, sharing Mexico's host duties with the capital city. 11 other venues will be held. 11 other venues will be in the USA, as well as 2 in Canada. It's a wrap from the sports desk at the hour at 7:37 a.m. Central African Time. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu Di Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Você é fluente em português? É apaixonado por rádio e quer trabalhar na África do Sul? Você tem documentos que o qualificam para trabalhar na África do Sul? Nesse caso, podemos ter uma oportunidade para você trabalhar no Canal África. Envie seu currículo e demonstração para Canal África at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Lembre-se, se você não receber alguma resposta nossa em 14 dias, isso significa que você não foi selecionado. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Right, let's find out what's happening now from the world of business. Here's Chanduko Likeke with our details.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning. President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa's economy continues to be held back by structural and regulatory inefficiencies. He says the country must grow faster to create necessary employment the country needs to achieve prosperity. Ramaphosa says Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's national budget will address these pertinent issues when he delivers it later this month. Ramaphosa was speaking at the Union Buildings in Pretoria yesterday, where he launched Phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela.
The Minister will deliver Budget 3.0 on the 21st. And the budget will, to a large extent, be a different budget from what we have had in past years. It's a budget that is going to make us look forward. It's a budget that's going to commit a lot of money also to infrastructure. And you could say for the first time in many, many years, we are now going to be able to spend up to R1 trillion on infrastructure over the medium term.
The Public Servants Association, PSA, in South Africa has called on the Auditor General to investigate the financial conduct of the KwaZulu-Natal Province Department of Health. The call comes after reports revealed that the department owes suppliers an alarming sum of $93 million, with many invoices overdue by over 90 days. The association says this has negatively affected the quality of the services provided at the province's hospitals. PSA provincial organizer Olani Dlamini has called on the Premier to address the situation.
If this was an ordinary misconduct by an ordinary employee or a member, consequence management could have come to the fore. So we are calling now upon the accounting officers to face the consequence management. So then we are saying the Premier must hold the bull by its horn. And if the Premier is unable to do so, then we'll be escalating this issue to the Minister to intervene in order to make it a point that our health system in KZN becomes stable.
Ivory Coast, the world's biggest cashew grower, has raised its projected output to 1.3 million metric tons from 1.15 million tons, even as potential U.S. tariffs and a falling dollar drag down exports. Mamadou Beda of the Cotton and Cashew Council says the production increase stems in part from curbs on the smuggling of raw cashews to neighboring Ghana and Burkina Faso. Beda adds that at the same time, Vietnamese buyers have drastically cut purchases of Ivorian raw cashews for processing in response to U.S. tariffs. In North Africa, Morocco's Casablanca Stock Exchange, CSE, expects to launch a new derivatives market within weeks as part of an effort to boost liquidity in one of Africa's largest exchanges. CSE Chief Executive Tariq Sehaji says derivatives will expand the investor base by allowing participants to take long and short positions and enable them to trade a basket, particularly tracking the MASI 20, which includes the 20 largest and most liquid stocks. The derivative offerings are aimed at being the first part of a broader expansion with contracts for interest rate futures, single stock futures and equity options set to follow. In news further afield, China and the U.S. are to hold their first talks about tariffs since President Donald Trump started a trade war. The U.S. introduced a 145% tariff on Chinese imports last month, while China retaliated with 125% on American goods. The BBC's Celia Hatton has the details.
Beijing said it was attending the negotiations in Switzerland at the United States' request. But any form of pressure or coercion will not work on China. Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who is set to meet the Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, told Fox News the talks were about de-escalation, not working out a big trade deal. But behind the scenes, both countries are feeling the bite of high tariffs. Some Chinese factories have already slowed down because of the trade war, and shipments into America's biggest port, Los Angeles, are expected to drop by a third this week.
$1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 606. In Botswana, 13 pula 47. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 403. Zambia, 29 kwacha 95. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 72. Russia, 80 rubles 94. India, 84 rupee 70. China, 7 yuan 22. South Africa, $1 is at 18 rand 23. $1 is at 74 pence to the British pound and an 88 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is at $3,390, platinum at $982 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $61.62 a barrel. That is all. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you'll be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
Right, over 2,000 professional accountants, policymakers and thought leaders from over 65 countries gathered in Kigali this week for the 8th Africa Congress of Accountants, now widely regarded as the continent's premier platform for shaping the future of the profession. Hosted under the theme Creating Value for Africa, the event spotlighted issues ranging from the impact of artificial intelligence, hybrid work, to the role of accountants in driving inclusive growth. Well, a highlight was the keynote address by the ACCA Global President, Ayla Majid, which previewed insights from the upcoming Africa Talent Trends 2025 report. Joining us now to unpack the major themes and outcomes of the Congress, we're now joined by Jamil Ampoma, who is the Director of ACCA Africa. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Let's start with a big picture look. What have been some of the big things that have come out from this Congress for you?
Yeah, I think for me, a few things, but one of the most significant is that the Africa Congress of Accountants, showcases the significant evolution of the profession in Africa and the role it is playing across the continent. Especially very clear here in Rwanda, which is our host country. And I think the main elements are the need to be able to innovatively navigate, some of the changes that we are seeing across the world to ensure we contribute to driving sustainable growth. That for me has been the big picture perspective, because that sort of comes through in all the interactions that are happening.
How has this year's theme played out, creating value for Africa? Has that been reflected in the sessions that you've seen?
Yes, to a large extent in most of the sessions that I've been in, and then also when speaking to delegates, that comes through very strongly. I think value creation has been intentionally woven into these discussion topics. And the key message to the profession in Africa across all sessions so far is very clear. I think there's the expectations of businesses and economies for the profession to evolve from, playing its role where it's seen as looking in the past to enabling value creation and accounting for sustainable future. So that really has been very, very, strongly positioned. Yeah, absolutely.
What was the keynote address by President Majid? I know that President Majid spoke about workforce development, economic growth. What would you say were the key takeaways from her message?
Yeah, in terms of key takeaways, the profession, really has a significant role to play in Africa's ability to respond proactively to the global drivers of change. So by those, I mean, developments such as AI, the geoeconomic fragmentation we are seeing, climate action, and also the actions or inactions of organizations, policy and key decision makers in Africa to respond to talent trends in the profession, especially through the research that we did. We did recognize that there was a demand for flexibility in the type and ways of working and in investments in AI and sustainability skills. And all of these will determine how well the profession is able to help, the region maximize opportunities. And I think finally, professionals also have a responsibility to upskill and reskill for impact, not just gaining new knowledge, but building competencies to remain relevant now and in the future.
I trained as an accountant years and years and years ago, and I'm just wondering what shifts have taken place, especially with things like AI. Does the role of the bookkeeper, for example, shift? Because now you almost train business people to literally just input their checks or their payments from their bank statements, and all the financials are done automatically. Is the profession changing? I mean, the accountants right at the top of the tree probably work differently, but what about middle and lower people in the accounting chain?
No, that's a really good question, and I think one that has been exercising, our minds at ACC, and of course covered during the conference. The reality is that the profession has always evolved, and if you recall probably from your days of training, I don't want to guess your age, but we use calculators, and then from calculators, we moved to spreadsheets, and then from spreadsheets, we kind of gradually evolved, and now we have really robust systems, which would help with a lot of automation. But I think there's a lot of work that's to be done around data integrity, what actually the quality of data that is being processed for accounting and for decision making. So the skill sets will evolve, but it doesn't mean that the if you like the relevance of the accountant at the various sort of levels will become irrelevant. So we then need to make sure that we are upskilling, whether it's at the lower level, the technician level, or indeed at the professional level, because each area would also, have to evolve to be able to add value. It's not only at the top that we need to add value, it's through the entire value chain of service delivery from the accountancy profession.
And is the training of accountants shifting more and more towards strategy and preparing for future and making decisions about the future? In the past, it's been mostly record keeping and historical in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is shifting. I believe that shift has, been, taking place for some time now. If I take the ACA curriculum, for example, some of the modules we have today were not, assessed, let's say, 10 years ago. So, aspects around, digital aspects around sustainability, and really aspects around, strategic thinking. Our final level, if you like, assessments is a strategic professional, which really, entails quite a number of, examinations which are pitched at the strategic level, giving, the accountants, the skill set to be able to add value right up to the boardroom.
All right, and perhaps finally, I've been curious as well in terms of you have global standards for accounting, necessarily so, but there are things that are unique to Africa. I just think about sometimes hyperinflation or multiple currency type scenarios that are peculiar to Africa. Is there a developing of the profession for African needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great question, Peter. The way that this plays out is through having a very united voice and being coordinated. So some of the challenges you refer to hyperinflation may not necessarily be limited to one country. So what would you would be pleased to hear is that the Pan-African Federation of Accountants, which is the regional umbrella body for accountants in Africa, and which ACC is an affiliate of, is able to contribute directly through engaging its constituent professional accountancy bodies, and would then be able to influence, standard setting. So by all means, we are not proposing the setup of an independent or separate standard setting body for Africa to cater for the peculiar needs of Africa. But then, the input from Africa is very, very, relevant. And we, for example, recently worked with the Pan-African Federation of Accountants to contribute to the forthcoming standards in sustainability for the public sector. So I think there's a coordinated approach to be able to, drive some of these initiatives. If we spoke 10, 15 years ago, I couldn't be able to give that, very robust response. But we now have those arrangements in place.
Sounds very, very exciting. You might be pulling me back into the profession, Jamil.
You'll be welcome. We need you.
Thanks so much.
We need lots and lots of accountants. We are really short of accountants in Africa.
So, right.
we need all hands on deck.
Jamil, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That's the director of the ACCA Africa, Jamil Ampoma, talking to us about their conference of accountants from 65 countries gathering in Kigali this week.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
South Africa and Botswana have concluded a new agreement in relation to addressing electricity shortages. This emerged during a meeting between South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Botswana counterpart, President Advocate Duma Boko, in Johannesburg last week in South Africa. On Monday, Boko told journalists during a report following a press conference on his working visit to South Africa that the country has committed to assist Botswana in addressing its power challenges. Channel Africa's Shingirai Matondo reports from Gaborone in Botswana.
We have now an agreement that we've just concluded in relation to addressing power shortages in Botswana and having a more durable, more meaningful arrangement that departs from what we've had before, which was to buy at emergency prices. Now we've settled it at a reasonable scale, and we will improve our power situation that side in collaboration with South Africa.
This is President Advocate Duma Boko reporting back at a press conference in Gaborone, the capital of Botswana, following his recent trip to South Africa. Despite facing similar electricity challenges like any other nation in the Southern African Development Community or SADC region, Boko said South Africa's reassurance is a testimony of the long-standing bilateral relations between the two countries. Further to settling and selling electricity to Botswana at a non-emergence rate and at a reasonable scale, Boko said Botswana and South Africa have agreed to work hand in glove in renewable energy production.
As both countries look to renewable energy, we need to strengthen and even establish where none exists, manufacturing, for instance, of photovoltaic panels and so on.
English, Kiswahili, Chinyanja.
Botswana established in that space and in collaboration with South Africa, because the market is there and it's ready. So these are the issues.
Just last week, South African Minister of Energy and Electricity, Dr. Kosensu Ramaphosa, was in Gaborone on a reciprocal ministerial street visit where he met with his Botswanan counterpart Buhulu Joy Kenwendo. It is at this meeting that the two ministers had the opportunity to discuss potential collaborations on new electricity generation and supply, enhancing interconnectivity and aligning policies to improve efficiency and synergy in their energy systems. In a statement, Business Botswana, a Chamber of Commerce, employee organization and business representative board that offers various services and advocates to its membership, welcomed the development. Tafadzwa Matambo is a senior labor law lecturer at the Institute of Labor and Employment Studies in Gaborone. Matambo said the new agreement between Botswana and South Africa is anchored on the ethos that precipitated the establishment of SADC and the African Union or AU.
This is just a show of why it is important as African nations, not only in the region, but in the whole context of Africa, in order to unite. What has happened? The question still begs to be answered. What has happened to our organizations like SADC? What has happened to our organization like AU? As we see this continuing, we hope that this is just a drop in the ocean of the new bilateral agreements that are going to be enforced and worked upon by two countries going forward.
South Africa is Botswana's largest trading partner, accounting for over 50% of her northwestern neighbors' imports. Reporting for Channel Africa from Gaborone here in Botswana, this is Ashingra Madondo.
French and Portuguese, the languages that unite 1 billion people. We have been there.
Very good morning to you as we enter the third and final hour of Africa Rise and Shine. We're coming to you from our Johannesburg studios in South Africa, live here in the Channel Africa studios. Of course, you can find us on DSTV, channel 802. We are on OpenView on 628. You can also find us on www.channelafrica.co.za. My name is Asanda Beda. I'm with Peter Ndoro. Good morning.
Yes, I'm so excited about this PayPal thing. This is why I'm concentrating to see what the latest is. So 4 rounds of voting that we're going to be seeing today, and we could get a result. We'll have to wait and see, but very exciting. And we'll be unpacking that. But also, we're curiously looking at press freedom across the continent. And a lot of our countries, sadly, do not have a great record when it comes to that. And we'll unpack that in this half hour.
So let's get our news update with Onel Nzinzi first, and then Musubudi Makura with sports headlines after her.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Mali has suspended political activities across the country ahead of a planned protest against the military junta that has ruled since coups in 2020 and 2021. The West African country's political parties are demanding a return to constitutional order and a presidential election and are expected to gather for a demonstration on Friday. The junta originally committed to holding elections in February 2022, but that timeline had been pushed back several times, Joel Khodi reports.
The junta said in a statement read on state TV on Wednesday that activities of political parties and other political organizations had been suspended until further notice to preserve public order. Last week, a national conference of political actors recommended naming junta leader Assimi Gota as president with a 5-year mandate. The conference also recommended the dissolution of all political parties and the tightening of conditions for the creation of new parties. In response to that announcement, a coalition of political parties held a demonstration on May 3, saying Malians were not represented in the conference. Parties were expected to gather again on Friday.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the closing ceremony of the 15th Commonwealth Regional Conference for Heads of Anti-Corruption Agencies in Africa this morning. The 5-day conference is taking place in Cape Town. Retired Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and Justice and Constitutional Development Minister Mamoloko Kubai were amongst the speakers at the conference this week. Both reflected on the necessity of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, headed by Zondo from 2018 to 2022, and the ongoing fight against corruption in the country. South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party leader, Julius Malema, has condemned the British High Commission's failure to process his visa application to the United Kingdom. Malema was supposed to address students at the 11th annual Cambridge Africa Together conference at the Cambridge University this week, and he has taken to social media to express his frustration. The EFF says this is nothing more than an expression of a bureaucratic process being used to suppress political dissent. Kailihle Kumalo reports.
The EFF says it's well aware that this is a reflection of the imperialism against Julius Malema, who has been a strong and critical voice against the United Kingdom for its role in the atrocities of colonialism, particularly its role of the British monarchy in the slave trade and its role in the genocide of Palestinians. The party says it will never be discouraged from building global solidarity against imperialism and capitalism. The EFF has blasted the British High Commission in Pretoria, saying it's delayed the processing of the visa application, and it has notified them that the visa will not be processed on time.
A study by Ghanaian researchers has revealed that since the introduction of the 1994 free schooling program, the country has recorded substantial increases in enrollment rates at the basic education level. Ghana introduced the free compulsory universal basic education program in 1994. This meant that families could send children to public schools without paying school fees. In 2005, it introduced the capitation grant scheme to further reduce financial barriers to education and increase access. Senior lecturer at the University of Ghana, Paul Kayer, explains.
So it is well known in the academic literature that there's something that is called the quality-quantity trade-off. So when you add more quantity, sometimes you may lose quality. So we bring it to the education, but you don't increase the number of classrooms, schools, teachers, books, etc. to keep up with the numbers, and quality is likely to decline. And so one of the things that inspired this was because in Ghana we were expanding to free secondary education. And so we wanted to just get a sense of, okay, so how did the free education at the lower level pan out in terms of learning out? So that's really what started it all.
And lastly, the 133 cardinals involved in the secretive conclave at the Vatican will return to the Sistine Chapel this morning to vote again on who should be the next pope. Last night, thick black smoke could be seen rising from the chimney of the chapel, signaling that the cardinals had not reached an agreement during their first ballot. The BBC's Marianne Mshiri.
After the first vote of the conclave, no pope has been elected. We saw earlier black smoke billowing out of that chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel. It was a long wait, though, for those tens of thousands of people who had come to St. Peter's Square to watch that chimney, and for us watching it here.
Channel Africa News, I am Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And
And coming up in your sports news, Asawa, Nigeria booked their place in the quarterfinals of the ongoing CAF Under-20 Africa Cup of Nations tournament with a hard-fought 2-2 draw against Kenya, while Mexico City prepares to welcome millions of people for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Details coming up at 8:30.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
It's 7 minutes past 8 Central African Time, and let's get into this hour's news then, making headlines on the continent and around the continent. We move to Somalia, or we go to Somalia firstly. So Somalia has signed an oil deal with Turkey. The hydrocarbon exploration and production agreement was signed against the backdrop of escalating tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia over the controversial maritime deal between Ethiopia and Somaliland. The deal has been signed as a significant leap by Turkey's ambitions in the Horn of Africa. To discuss this, we're joined on the line by Faisal Robil, who is a public intellectual who's written on the political economy of Somalia and the Horn of Africa region in general, as well as editor of Wada Hu News, the largest English and web-based Somali media house. Thank you for joining us, Faisal. How are you on this Thursday?
Very good. I'm calling or joining you from California. I'm very happy to be part of you.
Thanks for making time. How is this hydrocarbon partnership meant to work exactly between Turkey and Somalia?
Well, Somalia has been looking for a partner, indeed a very reliable partner for many years before the Civil War and after the Civil War. We recall that before the Civil War, Chevron and Conoco from the United States were the lead in finding some viable oil resources in Somalia. After the Civil War, Turkey proved to be a very reliable friend to Somalia in many aspects, and then the oil issue becomes the linkage and the item that ties between the two friends. So it sounds like it's viable. We are getting reports that about 20 billion barrels are already identified. So Somalis are very hopeful to take advantage of this partnership.
Can this be seen as a move to removing previous blockages to Somalia's exploration and investment of its natural resources? Or this may be a gamble that's being spearheaded by Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources, Tahir Mohammed?
Indeed, it's not a gamble, because Somalia and Turkey have multi-layered relationships and agreements, including some sort of defense. As you know, and as you indicated in your introduction, there is a rift between Somalia and Ethiopia on Somalia's maritime resources and ports, and Turkey has been playing a positive role to mediate between the two neighbors. So I think the relationship that we see between Turkey and Somalia is definitely above and beyond a single minister or even beyond a single president. The Somali public opinion somehow feels that Turkey is there to be a friend and give them Somalis the hand that they needed, that they could not get either from Western oil companies or from the Middle Eastern friends who have technologies and money to reach that dream. There is this trust among Somalis, with the exception of a small number of critics, that Turkey is very well situated to help Somalis to discover and find their objectives in this area.
Somalia's mining bill is currently at drafting stage before Parliament. Is this the right time to enter into this collaboration with Turkey? Or could it be, a high-risk investment in terms of as far as protections on legalities are concerned?
Yeah, you can say that, from the surface and being an observer from outside, this may not be the right time because of the quagmire in which the parliament is and the unnecessary fight that exists within the parliament of Somalia. The fragility is there. All those issues are challenges Somalia is faced, and it will face. So the question and the debate is, can Somalia move forward while it has these challenges, or it can put these opportunities on the back burner and come back sometime. So I think that's the risk management that the leadership is doing, and there seems to be this consensus that what they gain is much more beneficiary as opposed to what they can lose by not being 100% there to really execute. However, there is a very broad debate among Somalis as to the role of the parliament vis-a-vis the executive branch. So that debate has not settled yet.
So when you talk of Turkey having a trust in terms of Somalia and how it feels about doing business with the country, that's, on a general sense. But does Turkey possess the right partnership qualities if we're zooming into what's needed to make this a prosperous one for all, and the necessary technology to ensure that there is a prosperity for this bilateral commitment?
Well, so far in terms of the agreement, the draft, as you said, the Somali experts who are working on this issue have testified several times that the agreement is within the norm of and modalities in which the oil exploration takes place. In terms of the technologies, I think maybe Turkey might not be a big country when it comes to oil explorations, but as I say, I think this is the best that Somalia can have at this point in time. As I said, in the 1990s, Conoco and Texaco, all of them were there, but they are not here. China was another country that may have been interested, but as you know, China is tied with the Ogaden oil, which is another issue. So I think maybe Turkey was the only country that is there to take the risk. And as you said, Turkey is taking a huge risk, much more than the Somali risk. And that question could be addressed to the Turkish as opposed to the Somalis. I think that the risk is, worthy of the potential, and I would emphasize the word potential benefit they can get from this exploration.
What are the benefits for Turkey from this deal?
It's getting, a reliable oil in the future with from a country that will not pressure us. It has access to the Indian Ocean and Somalia's Gulf of Aden. It is just, as you know, Somalia is, whether you call it notorious or very well known, to be the first country that brought Russia into the Horn of Africa, and indeed North Africa. It was the first country that had solid relationship with the United States, the Soviet Union in the 1969-70, and then Libya and others followed suit. Turkey's international diplomacy, as I read, is beyond really Somalia. Somalia may be the stepping stone, but the diplomatic objectives of Turkey is that it wants to expand its footprint in Africa, and Somalia could be the place where it starts beyond the issue of the exploration of oil.
What, finally, measures in your view should both parties adopt to ensure that there is no exploitation of either side, of either party? I guess this is where international laws and certain bodies would come in.
Exactly. I think they should observe the international law and modalities that usually divvy the proceedings and the benefits from the oil exploration, and that would be worked in the future. What I would be very much emphasizing, and I spoke with some leadership at the top in Somalia, is the environmental issue of this, of the magnitude of this, both offshore and inshore. Somalia does not have strong environmental issues. The country is suffering from the impacts of climate change. Poverty levels of the country is very high. So what is in there as what we call, from planning perspective, a public benefit package for the Somalis? Not only the proceedings that the government gets from the oil and from the agreement, but millions of Somalis would be impacted environmentally and other socially and what have you. So what is that benefit that Somalis would be gaining? And I think, in addition to the agreement on the oil issue, there has to be a public benefit package prepared to mitigate the environmental and social impact that this huge environmental takeover or endeavor would bring onto Somalis. And as you know, Somalia is very poor, urban poverty is very high, displacement is huge. Mogadishu's population can be broken into probably two equal halves, one half being displaced people from all over the civil war area. So the environmental issue is not catching the attention of media and policymakers, but I think that's where I will look as we go into the future on this matter.
Well, thanks again for your time, Faisal, and do have the rest of your day. That is good.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Faisal Roble is a public intellectual who's written on the political economy of Somalia as well as the Horn of Africa region, and he's editor of Wadia News, the largest English and web-based Somali media house.
Celebrate unity, progress. Through every shift, every milestone, and every triumph. Not just reporting history, but shaping the conversations that define Africa's future. For brands, media planning, and advertisers, Channel Africa is more than just a platform. It's an opportunity. With 25 compelling shows covering current affairs, sports, business, music, and lifestyle, we deliver an engaging Pan-African audience ready to connect, invest, and act. Multi-award winning, internationally recognized, digitally accessible across. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
The arrest of 4 journalists in Kenya linked to the controversial BBC documentary Blood Parliament has sparked a wave of concern about media freedom across Africa. The journalists, part of a team behind the investigative film, were detained just days before the World Press Freedom Day, raising red flags amongst press freedom advocates. Now, the incident has added to growing unease over the safety of journalists and the shrinking space for independent media across the continent. Well, to help us unpack the broader implications, we're now joined on the line by Tandy Smith, who's head of programs at Media Monitoring Africa. Hello, Tandy. Always good to talk to you. Let's start with your take on what's happened to these 4 Kenyan journalists. What concerns you most about this incident?
It's deeply, deeply concerning for not only for the individual safety of journalists, but as you say, for the implications and sort of the precedent that it sets for the safety of journalists. It's so difficult because at some points you feel that we've made so much progress in terms of promoting independent journalism and holding those in power accountable. But when we have incidents like this, and arresting of journalists in 2025, it does send shockwaves across the continent about what we are focusing on in terms of the safety of journalists, and it leads to all sorts of implications, including self-censorship by journalists. And in this day and age, we need independent media more than ever.
I just wonder, from your observations as Media Monitoring Africa, is this a trend? Is this something that's sadly more common than we think across the continent?
I think it is more common than we think. As you mentioned, we've just celebrated Press Freedom Day on the 3rd of May, and we also see the report, Reporters Without Borders, the Press Freedom Index, being released recently. And the overall sentiment is that we are in a very concerning period in terms of press freedom. And so, we also know that the last 2 years have been one of the deadliest for journalists across the world. And, it's a chance for the continent to take a stand against attacks on journalists and violence against journalists. But, if we look at some of the reports coming from organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists, I think it is more common, and not enough focus and attention gets put on these individual stories of attacks on journalists. I think that there's definitely a sense of, everyone often talks about the changing landscape and the digital attacks on journalists, the online safety of journalists, which, we can focus on, or we can talk a bit more about. But I think we overlook the fact that there are still physical threats to journalist safety. And we are sort of in a time where we see the rise of attacks on independent journalism coming from the Trump administration and coming from the sort of West, and the crackdown on credible media and the trust in journalists. I think we're dealing with a very difficult sort of situation for journalists, and I think we need to put a lot more pressure, and we need to be a lot more vocal about the safety of journalists.
I think you might have alluded to this earlier when you talked about self-censoring. I'm wondering what incidents like this do in terms of the message to journalists about the work that they're doing, particularly when they're involved in high-stake investigative journalism. What do they interpret from seeing fellow journalists like these Kenyans being arrested?
It must be harrowing to be an investigative journalist, knowing that you are putting yourself at risk, but also knowing that the work that investigative journalists do I cannot stress enough the importance and the need for good investigative journalists. And I suppose that it's sort of the difficult catch-22 with the position of investigative journalists, because now more than ever, it's having independent journalism is more important than we've seen recently in recent years, at least. But when stories like this come out, and like you say, journalists see colleagues being arrested, being attacked, being clamped down, it must sort of create this air of self-censorship, where you sort of have to take a look and go, what is more important, my life or my livelihood, or telling the story. And I know at home we are here in South Africa, we are very fortunate that we have a very good level of independent media and media freedom. But it's not the case in many places across the continent, and so it does create an air of self-censorship, where journalists, would probably choose not to pursue a story, and so that is very telling for the sort of support and safety measures that are in place by editors, by owners of media entities. I think there needs to be a move of a lot more support, and support from the public as well for journalists doing their work.
I was just about to ask that, actually, because you've been talking about safety almost from the get-go of this interview. Are the publications, media houses doing enough, do you think, to protect journalists? What more could be done?
I don't think that they are doing enough. I think that, as I mentioned before, there's been a sort of move to realize the risks and challenges of online safety and harassment, which is a very big issue and a sort of very new threat to journalists. And so the focus has been on how do we make our online spaces safer for journalists, and the gendered perspective of our female journalists online. But in terms of the physical safety of journalists, I think that is often overlooked, because it's assumed that we have moved on from attacking our journalists, that there's an understanding that journalists should get a level of protection and respect. But it also means that journalists, looking at it from a slightly different perspective, that journalists are doing their job. When journalists are holding those in power accountable, and when they are exposing the wrongdoing, those responsible are going to try and clamp down on journalists. But I do think that media owners or editors, I think as an industry and as civil society, there can be a lot more done to ensure the safety of journalists.
Yeah, it's a really difficult space, terrain. I guess going forward, one can only push for higher safety standards. You talked about the vulnerability of women and also hinted about cyber attacks. What kind of things typically are journalists facing? And I suspect female journalists are probably more vulnerable in terms of cyber attacks.
We definitely see female journalists being more vulnerable for cyber attacks. There's definitely a gendered element to that, and it's because of the broader nature of gender-based violence, and what we see offline sort of translates online. And some of the cyber attacks that we're seeing is often an onslaught of harassment, which is often of a sexual nature. So we'll see harassment, and we'll often see manipulated images, defamatory images, or defamatory sort of information, misinformation and disinformation being targeted and circulated about journalists. And then one of the more harrowing sort of cyber attacks that we've seen around journalists online is where it's called, the term is doxing, where personal information is discovered and shared online with a sort of incitement to violence element to that. And the problem with the online harassment and attacks is that it's very cleverly done, where it often doesn't warrant a criminal charge against it, but it's just pushing the boundary of harassment or hate speech. And so I know we're doing a lot of work at Media Monitoring Africa to try and advocate and lobby for more safety measures for journalists in place online.
Tandy, we're going to have to leave it there. A big issue, one that we need to keep on talking about. But thanks so much indeed for sharing your thoughts and insights on the program today.
Thank you very much.
That's Tandy Smith, head of programs at Media Monitoring Africa, helping us unpack this issue of safety in Africa and press freedom across the continent. It's 8:30, which means it's time for your news headlines. Here's Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Mali has suspended political activities across the country ahead of a planned protest against the military junta that has ruled since coups in 2020 and 2021. The West African country's political parties are demanding a return to constitutional order and a presidential election. The British High Commissioner in South Africa, Anthony Phillipson, has offered an apology to the economic freedom fighters leader Julius Malema. The EFF leader was due to travel to the UK to speak at the Cambridge University's Africa Together conference this coming weekend. And events are set to take place today to mark the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Let's say good morning again to Musibudi Makura. She's got our sports news. What's happening?
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning once again from the sports desk. Well, this is what's happening at the moment. Nigeria having booked their place in the quarterfinals of the Total Energies CAF Under-20 Africa Cup of Nations tournament following a hard-fought 2-2 draw against Kenya at the 30 June Stadium in Cairo, Egypt on Wednesday night. The result, coupled with Morocco's 3-1 win over Tunisia and another game played in Group B last night, means Nigeria finished second in the group with about 5 points, while Kenya exit the tournament with just 1 point from 3 matches. Despite already being eliminated before kickoff, Kenya put up a spirited performance and twice took the lead, only to be pegged back each time by the exceptional as well as experienced Nigerian side. Kenya's exit is confirmed after picking only 1 point from 3 games despite scoring in all 3 matches. With the group stage now concluded, Morocco topped Group B with 7 points, followed by Nigeria on 5, Tunisia on 3 and Kenya on 1. Nigeria will now shift their focus to the quarterfinals, where they will face off with a yet-to-be-confirmed opponent from another group as the quarterfinal stages of this competition get underway this coming weekend. Further afield now, Mexico City is gearing up to welcome more than 5 million visitors for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, whose opening match will be played in the sprawling megacity. Authorities having confirmed this on Wednesday. The top football tournament will be held in Mexico, in the USA as well as Canada, marking the first time that 3 countries co-host the global football event. Now, 3 of the 16 venues will be in Latin American nation, with the central city of Guadalajara as well as the northern industrial hub of Monterrey sharing Mexico's host cities with the capital city. Meanwhile, 11 other venues will be in the USA, while 2 will be in Canada. In cricket news now, Henry Dirksen scored 81 in the Proteas women's penultimate match of the ODI Tri-Series against India, rubber-stamping her position in the team and showcasing exactly why she was recently rewarded with her maiden Cricket South Africa central contract. Now, Dirksen's efforts were in vain, though, as the team ultimately lost by 23 runs, ending any hopes of making Sunday's final in Colombo. Having been set a massive target of 338 for victory, South Africa fell short yet again, with standing captain Chloe Traoré, the second highest scorer with 67 runs. Speaking after the match, Dirksen was disappointed not to have gone a bit further.
Yeah, I think ultimately it doesn't mean much if we're still lost. I think the last couple of games I've sort of been saying it, that sort of get out at a crucial stage, and probably just when the team needed me to kick on. So again, disappointed that we didn't get to kick on, but I think it's valuable experience going into possibly next games. And I'll have a look with our batting coach and the analysis, and see where we can get those 1% better and hopefully finish off some games for South Africa.
Now, she also lamented the small margins that cost them the match, although they did manage to score over 300 runs. The last time that happened was in June of last year against the same Indian team.
Yeah, I think again we came pretty close to a very big score, so there's some positives to take out of it. I think we're not down. We probably lost it again in small little moments. So just reflecting on it and looking at those moments and where we can be better, and just fixing it in the next game. But I think all in all the team is still in a pretty good space.
And finally, in tennis news, former world number 9 Fabio Fognini says this year's Italian Open in Rome will be his last appearance at an ATP Masters 1000 event. The 37-year-old Italian will face off with Brit at Jacob Fernley in the first round later on today, marking his 18th main draw appearance at the tournament, having reached the quarterfinals back in 2018. Fognini has won 8 of his 9 ATP singles titles on clay, including the 2019 Monte Carlo Masters. He said one of his fondest memories in Rome was beating the then world number 1 Andy Murray in straight sets back in 2017. That's a wrap from the sports desk at this hour, and that also concludes your sports news this morning on Africa Rise and Shine. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call on +27 11714 4459. I'm back with more sports news in the next hour for Channel Africa Sport. I am Mosibu D. Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa in Song with Chanduko Ligege.
So the artist that I just played now went by the name A.B. Crystal. So A standing for Alfred, B for Benjamin. What's your take on people having two names? Is it because maybe you can't decide on a name?
I've heard people saying that they are named because of whatever that was happening around.
This is things I also see now. I'm sure now a baby born in the Eastern Cape is called Nama Tarif.
You see now. Or it was a born baby when it was, what do you call these things we used to pay for men driving?
Nama Itol.
Across the globe, when Africa speaks, the world listens, and Channel Africa makes sure of it. For business, for culture, for Africa. Partner with Channel Africa.
Channel Africa, you can find us on our social media platforms at Channel Africa 1 is the handle across X, on Instagram as well as TikTok. On Facebook, we are Channel Africa. So we asked today, as we do in the mornings, your take on some of the stories that we cover. And today we asked the doors of the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican being closed on Wednesday, signaling the start of a secret conclave to elect a new pope to lead the 1.4 billion Roman Catholics. Your question was, what is your view on the process? At SACLI on X or Without Unity, the church is nothing, that's the handle, say we should simply pray that the doors of their hearts are not closed to the work of the Holy Spirit within and amongst them. So thank you for your views. You can keep them coming. We'll do one tomorrow, so maybe catch tomorrow's question.
Business news on Channel Africa, because Africa's voice is the future.
Asanda and Peter, good morning. CEO of Barrick Mining, Mark Bristow, says the Canadian company is spending $15 million a month to keep its Mali mine running and does not know where Mali's government is keeping the gold. In an interview about the long-running conflict with authorities in the West African nation, Bristow said the government there had walked back on an agreement to settle a tax dispute 3 times and called the jailing of Barrick employees in the country a human rights violation. Sisisi Halo has more.
Barrick and Mali's government have been locked in a dispute for more than 6 months over the Lulo Gungoto complex, Barrick's largest mine in Mali. In addition to arresting the 4 Barrick employees, authorities confiscated around 3 metric tons of gold in January, following accusations that Barrick was not in compliance with its tax obligations, prompting the miner to shut down the mine. Based on the current gold price, the value of the confiscated gold is around $318 million.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa's economy continues to be held back by structural and regulatory inefficiencies. He says the country must grow faster to create necessary employment the country needs to achieve prosperity. Ramaphosa says Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's national budget will address these pertinent issues when he delivers it later this month. Ramaphosa was speaking at the Union Buildings in Pretoria yesterday, where he launched Phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela.
The Minister will deliver Budget 3.0 on the 21st. And the budget will, to a large extent, be a different budget from what we have had in past years. It's a budget that is going to make us look forward. It's a budget that's going to commit a lot of money also to infrastructure. And you could say for the first time in many, many years, we are now going to be able to spend up to R1 trillion on infrastructure over the medium term.
In these tough economic times, a number of South Africans are feeling the pinch, leading to many people considering drastic measures to save money. The National Financial Ombud Scheme has sent out a stark warning, urging consumers not to cancel their insurance policies or default on premiums. Lead Ombud of the Non-Life Insurance Division, Edith Teixeira McKinnon, says it is critically important to maintain cover, especially when financial crisis hits.
If you really can't afford your non-life or short-term insurance cover,
you're hitting a rough patch, you're going through a rough time, rather contact your broker and insurer and let them know. There are so many ways in which insurers can work out perhaps a cheaper cover at a cheaper premium, but at least you are covered, even if it is limited. Don't just stop paying your premium, because that can affect your credit record.
In West Africa, Ivory Coast, the world's biggest cashew grower, has raised its projected output to 1.3 million metric tons from 1.15 million tons, even as potential U.S. tariffs and a falling dollar drag down exports. Mamadou Beda of the Cotton and Cashew Council says the production increase stems in part from curbs on the smuggling of raw cashews to neighboring Ghana and Burkina Faso. Beda adds that at the same time, Vietnamese buyers have drastically cut purchases of Ivorian raw cashews for processing in response to U.S. tariffs. In North Africa, Morocco's Casablanca Stock Exchange, CSE, expects to launch a new derivatives market within weeks as part of an effort to boost liquidity in one of Africa's largest exchanges. CSE Chief Executive Tariq Senhaji says derivatives will expand the investor base by allowing participants to take long and short positions and enable them to trade a basket, particularly tracking the MASI 20, which includes the 20 largest and most liquid stocks. The derivative offerings are aimed at being the first part of a broader expansion with contracts for interest rate futures, single stock futures, and equity options set to follow. Let's shift our focus to financial indicators this morning. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 606. In Botswana, 13 pula 47. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 403. Zambia, 29 kwacha 95. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 72. Russia, 80 rubles 94. India, 84 rupees 70. China, 71.22. South Africa, $1 is at 18 rand 23. $1 is 74 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. Looking at commodities, gold is at $3,398, platinum at $984 per ounce, the price of Brent crude oil at $61.53 a barrel. That's all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Africa is a story, a living, breathing, ever-evolving masterpiece. And for over 5 decades now, one voice has told it like no other. Channel Africa. More than just a broadcaster, Channel Africa is the pulse of the continent.
It's past 8 Central African time, and we get into our final look at this story now in this Thursday edition of Africa Rise and Shine. South Africa observes Mental Health Awareness Month this month of May, and the spotlight turns to an often overlooked group, the caregivers. These are the people who provide daily support, both emotional and physical, to others, yet rarely receive the same care in return. Whether it's nurses on the front lines, teachers in classrooms, or parents raising children with special needs, many are quietly battling their own mental health struggles. This is according to Kerry Rudman, who is founder of neurofeedback specialist practice Brain Harmonics, and joins us now on the line to discuss. Kerry, thank you for making time. How are you on this Thursday?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
Our pleasure, and thank you for making time. You say that you've seen a rise in carers seeking help. What are the trends that you currently what are the trends you're currently seeing when it comes to the mental health of caregivers?
So I'm seeing two different groups of, well, all caregivers are experiencing this on different levels, but definitely nurses are experiencing it on an immense level because they're not getting a lot of support. There's not a lot of resources. And then a lot of parents who are looking after kids with special needs or elderly people, they are experiencing burnout on huge levels. And I always go back to thinking about if you're on a plane, you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can help anyone else. And as a caregiver, nobody's looking after the caregivers. So they really are battling with sleep, with anxiety, depression, really just feeling absolutely down. And the other problem I'm seeing is that a lot of people around them seem to think that they've got it nailed because they're doing such a good job. So people don't stop to think if they're okay. And it's really about a lack of support where they're just absolutely exhausted.
We mentioned some who fall under the categories of caregivers in our society. We say
Yes.
nurses, teachers, and parents. But who are those that we don't usually think of as carers or caregivers, but also fall under this category?
So I think it's people who are in their homes and looking after other people in their homes. And if it's a teacher looking after a special needs child at home, where you're not really a teacher, you're a parent, but you're looking after and schooling a child, plus doing your normal job. The same with an elderly person who's frail or maybe losing their memory. So you're looking after them in your home, plus you still have to do everything that's required as a mom and a wife and whatever it is that you're doing. So those people aren't really seen because it's all in your house and nobody knows about it.
And why are caregivers particularly at risk of mental health challenges? I think maybe you touch on one of that it becomes such a norm, especially because you do it within the space of a household. It's expected to be that's what you do.
Absolutely, and I think that the personality of a caregiver is that they are giving. So they give and give and give, but they don't give to themselves. They're so busy looking after everybody else, and then they get to a point where they are absolutely exhausted or literally in a place of anxiety or depression, and then only realize, oh, what about me? Nobody's looked after me, because they don't think to look after themselves first. They're always looking after others.
What are the common symptoms or signs of emotional burnout that caregivers should be on the lookout for?
So I think when you get to a point where things don't interest you anymore, you kind of just don't care about those. You're not getting sleep, so you're exhausted even when you wake up, you're exhausted. You're starting your day off on that note. If you're feeling like you need to cry, you feel frazzled, and just more than anything, it starts with exhaustion, and then that will lead to depression, anxiety, and other things along the line. So the longer you stay in it, the more it's going to create other bad patterns in your brain.
And your ability to function is obviously negatively impacted.
Absolutely, and that also affects the person that you are trying to care for. And the more that person has to wait, or they're feeling frustrated, they're going to then take that back out on the caregiver. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle.
What else could contribute to a carer not seeking help when they start to experience burnout? We've touched on that it becomes normalized, especially because of the setting within which it happens. But then also on the important part of how we should sensitize our approaches when we want to intervene on their behalf, for example, as a spouse or a family member or a friend.
You know, the story about the frog that gets boiled in the water, I think it's that, you know, the frog doesn't realize that the water's heating up until it's kind of too late. And I feel like that's what they're experiencing. So they don't reach out for help and say that anything's wrong, because they actually don't realize it until they're really in it. So yes, as a family, as, you know, spouses, children, anybody who is in the house, to reach out and try to help, not necessarily with the caregiving duties, but help the helper, do something for them. And then as the helper, the person who is caring, you need to take some time out for yourself, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes. Do something for yourself so that you can find the energy to then deal with the duties that you dealt with.
Your advice to somebody who wants to intervene on behalf of someone that they see is actually burning out, but is not seeking assistance. What should they do?
Jump in and do it anyway. You know, often people will say, no, they don't need help, everything's fine. And then when somebody just jumps in and does it, they find themselves so surprised that people care. And it really does help when you don't have to ask. A lot of people have difficulty asking. So if somebody just does it, it'll help a lot, immensely.
What kind of support systems do you believe are most urgently needed to protect the mental health of carers?
There are so many. There really are. I think finding the thing that works for you is the best. There are lots of therapies out there. Talking to your co-workers, to your, if you're in a hospital, if you're a nurse, talking to the staff and your bosses to try and implement systems or things that will make it easier. There are counsellors that are free that people can go and talk to. And even talking to your bunch of friends, your girlfriends, whoever's around you is really, really important. Communication is amazing because a lot of people don't realize that they're actually in the same boat until they start talking.
And you mentioned counseling services that are free because affordability can also come in as being a hindrance, and one may think they don't really have options. Let's zoom into that a little bit, that things have become so accessible these days that you don't need that amount of money to go to an expensive therapist, for example, to seek help.
Absolutely. The important thing is to look for what is around you. And we, in all countries, we do have free services. And then, like you said, because everything's so acceptable, if you can jump online, you can find resources everywhere in the world that would be able to help you, but you just have to search for it.
And being that everything is digitized and everything is online, we also need to be careful in terms of what will work and what won't. What should we look out for there in terms of what are the healthier options of dealing with burnout?
So the healthiest thing that anybody could do is to find something to look after themselves. So we need to, especially as a carer, eat correctly, get quality sleep. Even if it's short amounts of time, make sure that it's quality. So get rid of devices, get rid of stuff so that you can de-stress before it's time to sleep. Hydrate, exercise, do all those things that we know about, but everybody puts it to the side because there's no time. Make time. The more that you do things for yourself, the better you're going to be as that carer for somebody else. Yeah. And that's totally free. In terms of finding which counselling works, I think that's going to depend on the person because you have to resonate with the thing that you're choosing. So that's got to be a bit of a subjective choice.
Let's also maybe dispel the myths around counselling or therapy when one does seek help when dealing with mental health. What are some of the myths in terms of once I, as a caregiver, I seek out the help that I need, and I might feel like I need to stick to a particular therapist even when they don't work for me?
Oh, absolutely not. I think if anything doesn't work for you, you have to let it go and go find something that does. So we do know what works for us because we know when we feel good. But listen to your own intuition. Listen to what you're feeling. If you don't resonate with somebody, definitely move on. We're not obligated in any way to stick with that person. There's no way. And if that doesn't work and therapy doesn't work, then go find something else that's fun. Anything that we can do where we can go into nature just for a few minutes is going to help revitalize us. And anything that you can do that is fun, even if you're cooking food and dancing in the kitchen, do something that's going to lift your soul in some way that's going to make you enjoy your day. Because we get so stuck in what it is that we're doing that we forget to have fun and to do the simple things. But they are free.
And I love those examples because there are so many approaches to the help that one can have, and also taking into account our different belief systems.
Yes, absolutely. And I think no matter what our belief system is, no matter who we are, if we go into nature, whoever we are, we do feel better. So, just go walk outside barefoot and just look at some greenery, whatever it is, go into nature, go for a walk. It really is very good for us. And breathing, it's oxygen, it's all good for your brain, and that's going to help us sleep better. So I know that's not a great solution for a lot of the traumas that people are going through, but it really does help in small doses if you can do something in your day to make yourself feel better.
Yeah. Are there symptoms or sort of points that can allude to somebody needing to completely stop work and just shut off everything for a while and go and try and admit themselves into an institution or a hospital?
So I think when you really hit that burnout and you are utterly exhausted, literally not finding strength to get out of bed, but you have to do it anyway because there's no one else to do it. And that often people will just cry. They hit such a low that they don't know how to get through it. On that level, you know that you're experiencing some kind of depression. The traumas are just too much to hold on a daily basis. Then you know that there's a problem. If you do not have anyone else who can help you and you're in that place where you're not sleeping, you just don't care, everything's difficult, you just don't know how you're going to get through every single day, then you really need to try and seek help elsewhere.
In closing, what message, Kerry, would you give to people who are struggling in silence while caring for others. And maybe they don't have necessarily the support system of people that can say, I recognize something in this person, let me intervene. They are really on their own.
Yes, there are many, and I know that the circumstances are so rife that they can't stop caring for that person because there's no one else to do it. And then maybe finances are short and it snowballs. So when you're in that, know that there are free services and there are other people you can talk to. So look for anyone around you that you can talk to share it. But you have to talk. You have to talk out and say, I'm struggling, so that other people know.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Kerry, for your time. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Have a great day too. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Kerry Rudman, excuse me, is founder of neurofeedback specialist practice, Brain Harmonics, talking to us on the line. Mental health awareness is quite important. I think we entered May saying it's Mental Health Week, or was it the end of April?
I'm not sure, but what I know for certain is that everybody has a mental health issue. Mm-hmm. It's just the degree of it that varies, and I don't think we take it seriously enough, actually.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just brush it off and saying, I feel a bit down, or I'm not in a great mood. All of that is actually part of your mental health.
Yeah.
And
that's
really
why I love
should
the
be
examples she gives as well, when she breaks it down in terms of what are the things to look out for as the individual who might be experiencing it, but also as the person who's around the individual who's experiencing, for example, burnout, and what they can do to intervene. Sometimes we need the people around us to, just wave a hand and alert us to some of these things.
And I actually think that sometimes if it's not extreme, we don't think it's a mental health issue. Just being anxious, for me, is something I would consider mental health, because it actually affects how you perform that day.
And Kerry mentioned that as well,
being nervous, it can affect so much. And sometimes it's just a question of this neurofeedback. It's a whole new science, which I think I would have loved years and years ago.
To study it. That's never too late.
We sort of learned the hard way over time to cope with life.
It's quite important to know these things.
So, who do you think is going to be Pope?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Is it going to come from sub-Saharan
I'm going to wait
Africa?
on this one and not even think of anything and just wait for the announcement. It's definitely not African, I don't think.
Isn't that sad?
No, it's not sad. I don't think it's sad. I think everything has its time, and this is not that time.
267 popes later, still no one from sub-Saharan Africa.
Not yet. We had a first Latin American. Maybe let's allow for other firsts, and then maybe another century will give us a female.
65 million Catholics in Africa. I must campaign, man. All right, that's how we end the program today. Thanks so much indeed for joining us on Rise and Shine right here on Channel Africa Radio. I'm Peter Ndoro saying have an awesome day.
I'm Asanda, Beda. Goodbye from us. We'll see you, or you'll hear us. Or actually, you will see us as well, since we're live streaming tomorrow 6 till 9. Let's say good morning for the last time from us anyway to Onel Nsinsi with our news bulletin.
African-led, African-run, and deeply rooted in its heritage. It's the only news. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Looking at your top stories, Mali suspends political activities ahead of a planned protest, and the British High Commissioner in South Africa offers an apology to the Economic Freedom Fighters leader Julius Malema. Your latest news, greetings to our listeners. Mali has suspended political activities across the country ahead of a planned protest against the military junta that has ruled since coups in 2020 and 2021. The West African country's political parties are demanding a return to constitutional order and a presidential election and are expected to gather for a demonstration tomorrow. The junta originally committed to holding elections in February 2022, but the timeline had been pushed back several times, Joel Lechori reports.
The junta said in a statement read on state TV on Wednesday that activities of political parties and other political organizations had been suspended until further notice to preserve public order. Last week, a national conference of political actors recommended naming junta leader Assimi Goïta as president with a 5-year mandate. The conference also recommended the dissolution of all political parties and the tightening of conditions for the creation of new parties. In response to that announcement, a coalition of political parties held a demonstration on May 3, saying Malians were not represented in the conference. Parties were expected to gather again on Friday.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the closing ceremony of the 15th Commonwealth Regional Conference of Heads of Anti-Corruption Agencies in Africa this morning. The 5-day conference is taking place in Cape Town. Retired Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and Justice